Hey there. What you're about to watch is a supercut of all 5 of my reviews for Metroid Month of 2021. This is one almost 2-hour-long compilation of one of the largest and most demanding projects I've ever had the pleasure of working on. Without any further delay, I hope you enjoy.
Hello.
Welcome back, everyone. It looks like we made it to October, and that means that it's Metroid Month once again here at Wayneisboss. It is an exciting time to be a Metroid fan. At the time of this video going live, we are less than a week away from Metroid Dread hitting the shelves, and you better believe I'm going to be making time to do a review of that game later this month. But before we get there, let's slow down and pay tribute to a part of the franchise that helped breathe new life to Samus Aran's adventures, and, well, helped elevate the Metroid series to its prime. This month will feature a new full-length review every Sunday for Metroid Prime, Prime 2, Prime Hunters, Prime 3, and finally we'll wrap up the event on Halloween with Metroid Dread. And to help celebrate how the community has kept this series alive and led us to the release of Metroid 5, throughout each video you'll hear from some familiar voices of other creators sharing their experiences with the Metroid series. Some of you might be thinking that I stole that idea from the Game Apologist video on Sonic 3 and Knuckles. And you'd be right.
That's all right, buddy. We're all friends here. Granted, you'll be hearing from my lawyer, but hey! Enjoy your marathon.
We have a lot of ground to cover, so let's take it from the top. This is Metroid Month 2021. Let's get started. Last year, while we were talking about Metroid Fusion, I mentioned the pretty significant time gap between releases after Super Metroid came out. 8 years was a pretty long time to wait for a follow-up to a game people still adore to this day, but their patience was rewarded with the release of not one, but 2 brand new Metroid titles on the exact same day. But while it was Fusion's job to follow up the narrative and format of Super Metroid, this entry on the GameCube was meant to open up the franchise to many more possibilities in not only the locations and events the series could explore, but also in its mechanics. This game is set much earlier in the timeline than its GBA brother, taking things back to the events between Metroid 1 on the NES and Metroid 2 on the Game Boy. Everything in the Prime games, mainline or otherwise, is set in this time period, and I like this because I think it opens up the door to so much more material that can take place before some of the more dramatic shifts games like Fusion or Dread come packaged with. But of course, there was something else much more jarring about Prime that definitely didn't go unnoticed. Let's not forget, Samus was kind of left behind while all the cool kids were getting their fancy new setups in the Z-axis, and when the first 3D Metroid game was coming right off the heels of Halo Combat Evolved, this sudden shift to a first-person perspective was worrying to some. We had this inexperienced American team working on this new Metroid game after such a long hiatus for the series with some crazy behind-the-scenes stuff going on. The development of this title was very troubled, and there's enough history there to take up its own video. And actually, it already has, so you can check out Matt Mint Muscles' What Happened video if you dare to look further down that rabbit hole. But even on the surface, there were a lot of gears turning here, and not in the direction most longtime fans were happy with. Were they trying to turn Metroid into some kind of action shooter situation? That's not what Metroid's about. And oh boy, did Retro Studios agree. There were a lot of odd choices made for Metroid Prime during its development, but they were all working towards different goals than a lot of people were expecting at the time. And time has been weird to this game. While the days leading up to its release were riddled with worry, doubt, and uncertainty, the reputation that it's held onto after that has been that of a masterpiece. Some people even say that this is the best game on the GameCube or the best game in the series, but how well do those notions actually hold up? Spoilers ahead, this is Metroid Prime. Much like Super Metroid, Metroid Prime begins with Samus Aran responding to a distress signal coming from a research frigate orbiting a planet known as Talon 4. It's here we get to see the bounty hunter's arrival in her first detailed 3D depiction, and it's still one of the coolest introductions the character has had thus far. From here, you can get acquainted with the controls, and some of you may have noticed that no, I did not record this playthrough with the GameCube version. For the sake of a 16:9 aspect ratio and some somewhat cleaner footage, I am playing this on the Wii version with the Metroid Prime Trilogy Collection. Obviously, this adds motion controls, which I'm usually not a big fan of, but I find they work particularly well for this game. On the GameCube, the C-stick, which would normally be used as a right analog stick for moving the camera, is used for another mechanic we'll get into later, so the left analog stick is used for both movement and observation or aiming your arm cannon. You can use the stick to walk around or hold the R button to stand in place and aim your arm cannon in any direction in case you need to point at something specific or get your bearings. You can also hold the L button to lock onto enemies so you can move around during battles and dodge incoming fire without having to stand in place while you shoot at them. Now, on the Wii version, use the analog stick to move around and just point the Wii remote in the direction you want to look or shoot at. Again, I normally hate motion controls, and I think the GameCube controls feel just fine if that's the version you want to use, but for me, it's the remote nunchuck all the way. Now, why didn't they add the ability to use the GameCube controller on the Wii version in case you wanted the widescreen but preferred the traditional controls? I have no idea, but if there's ever a re-release of this trilogy, I really hope they consider adding some options here. These aren't the only mechanics your visit to the Orpheon will try to get you familiar with though, as you'll also be introduced to the concept of visors. Another difference in control options here, as switching to a new visor will require a button press on the D-pad for the GameCube version, but on the Wii, you need to hold the minus button and tilt the remote to a place on the UI to select the visor you want. Now, I'm accustomed at this point to the Wii version. I feel like the amount of effort it takes to just tilt the remote for a split second isn't too bad, and I like it just fine. But the simple button press of the GameCube version is going to be preferable to most players, something that I think could even serve as a deal breaker for which version someone will want to play, because you're going to be switching visors a lot. Your default visor is going to be used for basic exploration, traversal, and combat, but the first other visor at your disposal will allow you to scan objects in the environment. Now, see this right here? This is pretty much half the game. This gives you the ability to interact with objects like locks to doors or elevators, but just as importantly, this is part of the exploration in and of itself. Every standard enemy, every boss, every mechanically important item like save rooms or health drops, every computer with some information left by a space pirate, they all have their own logbook entries that will give you details on the subject, its relevance to the gameplay, like clues to weak points on a boss or the place it holds in the game's setting. You'll be scanning, and you'll be scanning a lot. It's part of the reason I think many people prefer little more than a small press of a button to access this ability, because it takes up so much of your time. I think for me, it still evens out in favor of the Wii remote, because even searching for things to scan feels easier and more natural with a small, quick movement of my wrist, rather than having to press a button to switch visors, park myself in place, look around, maybe readjust myself, and then hold down a button to look around some more. Both methods have their trade-offs and benefits. My preferred method just somehow ended up with a console I don't even like all that much. Whichever way you control this, it's a good way to learn about your surroundings, which is a useful tool here, as the frigate is littered with creepy parasites crawling all over the place, lots of broken machinery and structures, and more than a few dead or dying space pirates. With some investigation, you discover that they were experimenting on the parasites as well as other creatures aboard the vessel using some kind of dark substance that's making them stronger and more aggressive, but in turn more unpredictable and harder to control. Yeah, they got out. Once you discover the Parasite Queen and take her out, she falls into the frigate's reactor, and a series staple has already made its return, the good old self-destruct sequence. Samus has to hightail it out of there, but not before encountering Meta Ridley, the original space dragon you spanked in either the first game on the NES or Zero Mission, whichever you prefer, and yes, there's a correct answer, who's been outfitted with some cybernetic enhancements that are keeping him alive after the beatdown you gave him. You also get a cold splash of reality, as you might be thinking, I sure do have a lot of items and abilities at my disposal right at the beginning of the game, only to discover that despite the insane level of shenanigans Samus has been up to on a daily basis, all it takes is a well-placed explosion and a knock upside the head for her suit to malfunction and put all of your upgrades back to square one. And jokes aside, I do get it. With the way Metroid games are structured, finding new abilities and items throughout the game, becoming stronger and gaining access to new areas is part of the fun. It's a really stupid excuse to rip all this away from Samus narratively, but in terms of gameplay structure, this was probably the best way they could figure to handle things. Still, you have enough to narrowly escape to your ship and follow the fleeing Ridley down to the surface of Talon 4, where the real adventure begins.
So, I gotta start off with a confession. I didn't grow up a Metroid fan, despite the fact that my first system was a Nintendo Entertainment System, and being in the right age range to both appreciate and enjoy Metroid 2 and Super Metroid, they just passed me by for one reason or the other. But something I've always enjoyed about our goofy little pastime, or just entertainment media in general, is the ability to jump on into a long-running series and then moving backwards to appreciate what came before. And that's exactly what I did with the big revival of Metroid on the GameCube and GBA. Still, despite having a GameCube and knowing that Metroid Prime was one of the greatest games on the system, it still took me until the Wii came out before I finally beat that game. And thank goodness I did, because it's incredible. At launch, Prime was one of those games that I had just tried for a little bit and then promised myself I'd get back to eventually. But Metroid Fusion, on the other hand, got its hooks in me on day one. Now, I know to a lot of longtime fans, there was a bit of a critical kickback on that particular game due to linearity, a lot of dialogue, or some really silly environmental challenges. And looking back on it, I can agree with a lot of that criticism, but I still have nothing but respect for that game, and I'm really happy to see people coming around to it finally. Metroid Fusion was a very bold game. Samus' new suit was really unlike anything I had ever seen from that series, and it was the first time, growing up alongside it and never really jumping in, that it really caught my eye. And the premise was really interesting. You're taking on a souped up Super Samus? Are you kidding me? That's incredible. Metroid Fusion was trying to be bold and new while respecting what came before, and it literally had you fight the legacy of the series in the SAX, constantly fearing the power of what came before, but eventually learning that you can not only stand up to it, but in some ways surpass it. Yeah, you do lose a lot of the intimidation factor of the SAX on a repeat playthrough, knowing that it isn't actually around every corner, but instead in certain spots. Regardless, it still stands up as a fantastic game and a great introduction to the series. I really don't know if I would have had the patience for Metroidvania-style games without my introduction to this game. From here, I got to look backwards into the franchise and fall in love with games that my contemporaries had loved for years at that point. I was excited for Zero Mission as it came out. I finally played Castlevania Symphony of the Night because of that game. I have to thank Metroid Fusion for not only letting me fall in love with a franchise, but with an entire genre, and I couldn't be more thankful.
Once you land on Talent 4, things are going to start feeling very familiar. You need to start making your way through the chosen ruins you find here and reclaim some of your arsenal. Stuff like missiles, the morph ball, bombs, you'll recognize a lot of this from previous Metroid games, and just like before, everything you add to your moveset will increase your control over the environment you explore. The morph ball will allow you to roll around through tight spaces at high speeds, missiles will let you travel through new doors, the Varia suit will grant you access to areas with more extreme temperatures, the grapple beam will let you Spider-Man your way across large gaps. The more you find in this world, the more it will bend to your will. And it doesn't just stop at returning items. While, yes, you do reclaim the abilities you lost back at the frigate over time, you'll find some upgrades that return from other games, like the Spider Ball, which I think is handled a bit better here than it was in Metroid 2, where it was a bit too easy to lose track of yourself because it gives you too much freedom in open areas. Here, it's controlled by specific tracks you can use it on, a more organic solution that still keeps the power-up relevant through to the end of the game, but it doesn't come off as aimless as it did before. But there's still a couple of brand new items introduced in this game, stuff like the Boost Ball. Ever wanted to play a Metroid version of Pro Skater? Well, you ain't getting that anytime soon, but hey, at least this item lets you charge up speed in the Morph Ball and unleash it to use stuff like half pipes to reach new areas and nab new upgrades. There's some additional beam weapons you can pick up like in previous titles, but instead of stacking like they do in Super, here you switch between the beam you're currently using with the C stick or with the plus button and hand movement. Yeah, you can copy and paste my thoughts on the visor switching to this, you'll reach the same conclusion. These beams can be used to open certain doors, kind of like missiles, but you'll also find that certain types of beams are more effective against specific enemies. You can also find a couple of abilities that let you use your beam of choice and tap into your missile supply for a new outcome. The Flamethrower, Wave Buster, Ice Spreader, and I guess you could count the Super Missiles too, but I don't really use these? I don't know, I find the normal way of jumping around enemies and shooting them until they die works just fine for me. There is one other element the game brings to the table, and that would be the thermal and X-ray visors. By switching to the thermal visor, you'll be able to find your way through dark places and locate stuff like enemies or objects based on the heat signature they give off. And the X-ray visor will obviously allow you to see through solid surfaces and, I would assume have some pretty nasty effects on Samus herself, right? Like, are you good? Do you have any idea what those X-rays do to a person? Now, this stuff isn't just sitting out there waiting to be picked up peacefully. You're gonna have to fight for each new objective set out in the game. And you know what? Well, I think all the exploration, finding hidden rooms and passages, picking up energy tanks and missile expansions and all that is the real meat of the game. When Metroid Prime needs to get a little action heavy, it feels good. Samus is not as fast or nimble in first person as in the 2D games. The controls do feel pretty different, but you can still move around pretty quick with side jumps for dodges, and using your weapons to your advantage during encounters is important. I also like some of the logic that comes into play here. Like, you start to learn the specific strategies for avoiding taking hits from certain enemies and maximizing the damage you can lay out onto them. It feels like you're rewarded for really getting to know your enemies and familiarizing yourself with their movesets as much as your own. I'd say this is handled well for bosses too. Some of these guys take a second or two of thinking before you put together how to take them out, but others have some more complex solutions. And then some of them are just awesome. Like Thurdus, this giant bundle of rocks that comes to life to whack you into the next Nintendo Direct. This guy is just so cool. I think the only boss encounters I'm not too crazy about are some of the earlier ones, like the Hive Mecha and the Incinerator. This one is just kind of dull in its concept, and the other is annoying with how much you gotta circle around and find which wasps are stopping to take a jab at you, and you have to be quick enough to hit them before they hit you. But I guess if you have to have some weaker bosses, it's better for them to be placed towards the beginning. But man, the main attraction here is really between all of these big set pieces, and that would be the very world you're exploring. It starts as soon as you arrive, with a soft rendition of the Brinstar theme from the original game playing to help set you in the mood. The light rain dusting over the environment, the vivid colors, particles, the music, the sounds and sights, it's working towards making you feel like this is a real place open for you to explore. Analyzing the natural structures around you will clue you into where secrets are lying. Moving to new areas has different effects on your HUD. The different environments all have a purpose here.
Metroid Prime 1. This is the second Metroid game I actually played, and this game is my favorite of the Prime trilogy, hands down. It's a game that I can pop in today and just exist in for an extended period of time. It doesn't feel as suffocating as something like 2, where I feel like I have to take breaks from it, and it doesn't feel as gargantuan as 3, where I have to feel like I have to walk away from it after a while just to come back and reassess where I am in the world. Talon 4 is just a very comfortable location, and it's a location that slowly opens up the more you play it. In fact, despite playing 3 first, it's Metroid Prime 1 that made me fall in love with the Prime series. If I had only played 3, I would not have the appreciation for the Prime trilogy that I do now. And as I would try out other games in the future, like BioShock, I'd be surprised of how much of Metroid Prime's DNA is in those later titles. And honestly, there was a whole lot going on with this game. Knowing that this was Metroid's first 3D outing, every game back then, when it would have its first 3D rendition, it was a big deal. The first 3D Mario was 64, and it set the bar for that franchise. The first 3D Zelda was Ocarina of Time, and that's still considered one of the best games of all time. And it was only through retrospect that I learned that people really didn't have confidence in Prime 1 when they learned that it was going to be effectively a first-person shooter. Little did we know it would just be a first-person adventure with a shooting mechanic. It's amazing to see how well that game holds up now, and look back and read articles about how little people gave it credit, and it still sits as my favorite of the Prime trilogy, despite a really meandering fetch quest at the end of the game. Seriously, can we get a remake that just removes half of that, please?
A detail I love is how the environment adjusts to your familiarity with it, and I don't just mean that you're finding new goodies the more you explore, but on return trips to old locations, the music will shift to something a bit more grounded, showcasing how your adventure is progressing even if you're going back through previous areas. That does call one issue to attention though, and that would be the backtracking. Sure, Metroid games and other titles in the subgenre are pretty well known for this, but I swear Metroid Prime has some of the heaviest use of backtracking in the franchise, and a lot of that is really forced on the player. Many of the other games in the series benefit from multiple playthroughs, where you can learn to maximize the time you spend in each location to decrease the backtracking and reward you for learning the planet's secrets. Prime handles this benefit in a slightly different manner, as I think there's some benefit to learning how this world works and familiarizing yourself with the layout of each area, but just due to how certain blockades and obstacles are laid out, you don't have a choice but to move back and forth a lot to get where you need to go. Hey, you like Magmar Caverns? Well, I sure hope so, because you're going to be tracking back through it constantly in this adventure. Get used to that red hue. Now, don't misunderstand me, I love this world, and I've only come to love it more as I've learned new ways to travel around it, but it's hard to ignore that this structure can feel like padding at times, and the process of traveling around can feel much more tedious than it needs to. But these moments of frustration are often fleeting. While it does have you moving around in familiar directions rather often, it at least feels like something worthwhile is waiting on the other side. As you become more powerful and able to scour through more and more of Talon 4's world, you also discover more about what the Space Pirates have been doing here and what their plans are. As you've been seeing remnants of the Chozo littered throughout the planet's surface, you can discover text where they've left behind parts of their lore, and another reason why the scan visor is so important to this game. Discovering even the main plot of this game is dependent on how much work you're willing to put into finding answers to the many questions this world poses, and finding Chozo lore and research logs from the Space Pirates sheds light on Talon 4's history and the effects of something known as Phazon. Roughly 50 years before the game starts, the Chozo were living on this planet until a meteor crashed into the world and brought with it the dangerous substance called Phazon and a creature that has been feeding on it to grow more powerful. As Phazon begins to spread from the impact crater created by the meteor, it starts to destroy and twist everything it touches. What it doesn't kill, it corrupts, and the Chozo on this planet eventually fall victim to its influence. They were, however, able to seal the entrance to the impact crater to keep the creature inside at bay and reduce the amount of Phazon that was able to escape. Of course, at some point or another, the Space Pirates found the planet and discovered the Phazon, as well as its potential as a means to create deadly bioweapons energized with the stuff. Treading through their facilities on Talon 4, you can find their bases and mines, locations where they've been attempting to extract Phazon and using it to their bidding, infusing it with all manner of creatures and weapons, even corrupting their own troops to create some more fearsome soldiers, even going as far as to experiment on Metroids? Oh, right, this is before Metroid 2, so we haven't gone on that genocidal murder spree yet. But yes, the Space Pirates got their hands on Metroids again and haven't wasted any time trying to get them combat ready, but as you can imagine, these already being one of the most dangerous organisms out there really shouldn't be made more powerful by this stuff, but as it turns out, that's already happened long before this. That powerful creature feeding off Phazon in the impact crater, the one the Chozo have been trying to imprison, well, it turns out it's actually a heavily mutated and corrupted Metroid, one on a mission to feed and spread its Phazon as far as it can, a being known as Metroid Prime. Obviously, the Space Pirates are trying to get a hold of this thing. If it's a bad idea, they're all about it. And speaking of bad ideas, how about the final stretch of this game, huh? I guess I'm getting ahead of myself just a tiny bit here, but yeah, you eventually descend deep enough into the Phazon mines, tussle with this Omega Pirate here, and stupidly just stand in front of it while it collapses on you. Luckily for Samus, the modified Phazon from the pirate ends up fusing with her power suit, resulting in the Phazon suit, which will make her immune to damage from pools of Phazon, a helpful item for taking a stroll through the impact crater and the source of the Phazon to begin with. But wasn't the impact crater sealed away by the Chozo? Why, yes it was. And the method of breaking that seal is with the use of 12 Chozo artifacts that are hidden around the world of Talon 4. You have to go around looking for these things before you can access the final area of the game, and this right here is what comes to mind when I try to recommend this game to someone. It's not like it's the worst mechanic in the world, mind you. On paper, I like this idea quite a bit. It's one of the ways the game tries to reward you for gaining a more intimate understanding of this planet. On this playthrough, you know how many Chozo artifacts I actually needed when it came time to go open up the way to the impact crater? 2. I collected the other 10 just by remembering where they were earlier in my travels, and as I gained new upgrades, I was able to pick up the vast majority of these fairly early on. But on your first playthrough, this is just going to be a massive bout of whiplash, and the pacing of the game can feel like it comes to a jarring halt here. You might stumble across one or two of these just exploring around. I know I did when I picked up this game for the first time, but even then, you're going to have to stop everything you're doing, and the progression of the game just shifts as soon as you have to take a break for the scavenger hunt. That's not even been mentioning how backtracking can get really annoying with all these corrupted Chozo ghosts floating around that you have to use the X-ray visor to deal with comfortably. Or this one Chozo artifact, the Artifact of Spirit. The way it's hidden up here is so inconsistent with what you've encountered so far. You have to find the door leading to the thing behind this rock face with the X-ray visor and use a power bomb to get to it, but unlike most surfaces that can be destroyed by power bombs, the scan visor will in no way indicate that there's something special about this slab of stone, so you either have to know that this is here already, or you just have to whip out the X-ray scope here specifically. Stuff is gonna pick up after this, but the artifact hunt is such an unnecessary blemish on this game's pacing. With all 12 artifacts in hand, you can return to the seal and open the way to the impact crater, but shortly after, you're attacked by Meta Ridley. This is a really cool fight. He starts with a bit of an advantage, but as you take away his flight, you force him to play by your rules, and you gain much more control over the battle. From here, it's quick reflexes and patience, and then you can knock him out, with maybe a bit of help from the spirits of the Chozo guarding this place. From here, you have a short trek through the impact crater until you encounter the titular beast itself, Metroid Prime. This fight does what I would expect from a good final boss. Just about every item and ability you have is put to the test here, and the second form of this creature even forces you to make good use of your visors to take it down. I also kind of love the designs of these things. I don't think either one of them, okay, maybe more so the second one, but this doesn't really look that much like a Metroid to me, but then again, you know, the influence of the Phazon, heavily corrupts, physically alters, all that, I guess it works. As the goop-infused creature dies, it tries to latch onto you, but is only able to strip away your Phazon suit, leaving you unharmed as you escape the impact crater, and depending on how much information and items you've collected through your playthrough, you'll see Samus remove her helmet and appreciate a job well done and watch the credits roll. But if you collected every item and filled the logbook to completion, you'll get a little teaser of things to come, as from the remains of Metroid Prime comes a hand looking suspiciously like your own. And once you're done, if you're in the mood for more extra goodies, you can always link this game up with Metroid Fusion, and if you have completed save files on each, you can unlock the Fusion suit to use for a second playthrough of Prime, or unlock the ability to play the original NES game, though Zero Mission was just a couple more years out, and that's a way better way to play Metroid 1, so this is neat, but obsolete for sure. It really is a shame that such a good conclusion has such a jolting interruption to your gameplay right before it. Still, this game sets out to do something very specific, and in that area it excels, but let's not pretend it does that without tripping on its own feet a little bit along the way. Metroid Prime has a pretty stark difference from its 2D predecessors in its pacing. This is not a quick, snappy action game in the same way Super Metroid can be. This is like taking the slow buildup of the opening section of Sarah Station and the creepy atmospheric ambience of early Zebus and running with that feeling for the whole adventure. I mean, this is the first game in the series where the special ending you get is dependent entirely on how many items you collect and not affected by how fast you play it. Metroid Prime does not want to be rushed. It does not care how fast you can blast through it. The main objective of this title and the design philosophy that affects decisions made for every single aspect of it can be summed up with one word: immersion. Every single element, visuals, sound, the incredible music, the HUD, the structure of the world, even the scanning mechanic are all in service of immersion. And when it works, this experience is unparalleled. Finding the wrecked remains of the frigate submerged underwater and seeing the life of Talon 4 already claiming it as a new part of its home is just something else. Moments like these are beautiful in a way, and I can't think of many other experiences that are this effective at making a digital landscape feel so real to me, but these aren't just isolated incidents. The game is overflowing with this stuff. It's the main course of the experience, and it's simply fantastic. Yes, the artifact hunt sucks on your first playthrough, but it does get better, and even beyond any roadblocks you find, if you take the time and just bask in what this game has to offer, I think you, like many others before, will fall in love with Metroid Prime. It was a wonderful beginning to a new age of Metroid, and this review is the start of an exciting new chapter of my YouTube career as well. I've been looking forward to this marathon all year, and I can't wait to share more with you. In fact, if you want to hear me talk a little bit more about Metroid right now, you can catch me over on Did You Know Gaming's channel, where I help shed some light on an obscure little Metroid game that never made its way out of Japan. Well, sort of. If you want to know what that's actually about, you can check out that video right now. And I never really thought that I'd actually get a chance to be over on that channel, but that's a small dream come true. How about that? We also have Metroid Dread coming out this weekend, and next week you can hear my thoughts on the dark and experimental Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. But until then, thank you for joining me once again for Metroid Month. Remember that my top tier patrons get to see these videos 2 days early. You can find me on Twitter, Twitch, Discord, Sunset City, whichever you prefer. Links in the description, and of course, as always, spread the word, tell your friends, and until we see each other again, thank you so much for watching. See you next mission.
Hello.
We are back. Metroid Month is already off to a great start. Many of us already have our hands on Metroid Dread, and yes, I am going to be doing a review about it, but, you know, I need to spend some time with it first. Let's all just bask in the moment and let our thoughts and feelings about that game simmer for a bit, okay? Plus, I am making this review before the game actually comes out, so I do have to be kind of vague about it. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. Metroid Prime hit the scene and knocked it out of the park. Great critical reception, outstanding sales, and Nintendo themselves who is putting Retro Studios in a much better place than it was in before, even stepping in to put an end to that crunch culture that they had going on over there. And with such a resounding success found in the first 3D Metroid game, it was clearly time to get a sequel going. In fact, it seemed like the Big N was suddenly feeling confident enough to put a lot more faith in the series as a whole. Not every plan for the series panned out. There was a movie in the works at one point, but that didn't really go anywhere. Check out the video here for more info on that, but there was still effort being put in here. A reimagining of the original game developed for the Game Boy Advance, which we'll be talking about next year, a manga laying out Samus's origins leading up to said game, and of course, a follow-up to the surprise hit that was Metroid Prime. Though while the first game certainly had its creepy moments, it seemed like the sequel would be taking the horror side of Metroid to a whole new level, and we got a good preview of this with the bonus disc that was offered as a reward item for Nintendo.com members and was later packaged with alternate prints of the first game. It had concept art, a trailer, a little timeline guide, and of course, a demo for the game itself. We saw dead, lifeless corridors, a dark and dangerous planet, and some kind of mysterious doppelganger who looked an awful lot like our bounty hunter. It was kind of interesting seeing a new Metroid game building off the engine and mechanics of the one before it, but what's more interesting is how it still managed to craft a rather unique identity for itself. You know, before starting Metroid Month last year, there was only one game in the series I had never beaten, and that was this one. So, what are my thoughts on it now that I've actually played through it to completion? Well, spoilers ahead. This is Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. The setting of Echoes is a planet named Aether, where space pirates have been using the location as a base of some kind and routinely moving something to and from it. After a Galactic Federation patrol decides to investigate and doesn't come back, the Federation sends Samus to go fetch their red shirt stand-ins, and so off she sets on a new quest. But almost immediately, there's a bit of a twist. While entering the atmosphere of Aether, a storm damages Samus' ship upon landing. We see the ship will need to undergo some repairs before it's ready to take off again. Kinda cool considering in most adventures, Samus stays on planet because she's dedicated to the job, but here, she's stranded. Stepping into the power armor of Samus once again, you can begin searching for the missing Federation troopers. There's already a couple of changes here from the first title, the biggest being the way the scan visor works. In the first game, scannable objects will have a little box floating in front of it when you throw on your scan visor, but here the entire thing is highlighted in a certain color, with red indicating that it's important to advancement. Beyond just how the interface for scanning has improved though, I actually prefer the way this game uses scanning to help flesh out the world a bit more, but we'll get there. As for the rest of the game's controls, everything is going to be about the same as before. I should mention that I'm once again recording this through the Wii version. Given the length of this game, I needed to play through it in the most comfortable way, and frankly, I just prefer the motion controls, much to my own surprise. I mean, the footage here is easier to work with while editing, but when playing the Prime games, this just ultimately feels less clunky to me than the way the camera and arm cannon are controlled on the GameCube. That said, I do understand that there's quite a few differences between the Wii and GameCube versions for each game, and maybe I can dedicate that subject matter for its own video later down the line. But as for now, it would just be a bit much to fit all that into a discussion about the game's overall structure and design. One element I'm not crazy about for either version though, the menu UI. You've got this center ring with each option springing out from it, and you have to rotate around it to find what you're trying to select, and it's just weird. I get it, it does look cool, but it feels like a pain to use sometimes, especially when you're trying to flip through the logbook. Like, all I want to do is look back over some of the lore I've picked up around the planet, but the way it's compiled in these menus is nothing short of a headache. General observation is easy as ever though, and oh boy is there a lot to see here. No sign of the Federation soldiers, but they left a lot of crates around. I see some very big and very dead bugs and... Oh. Hey, I found him! I love the eeriness of this opening section. There's a good amount of build-up to finding these poor souls, and you're just left to wonder what resulted in the carnage laid out in front of you. But the questions only start to pile up as those dead soldiers you found start getting up and attacking you, possessed by some kind of dark force. After blasting through the living Dread, Samus encounters, well, Samus. Remember when Metroid Prime was defeated in the first game and it absorbed your Phazon suit, and during the secret ending, the suit's hand burst from the creature's remains? Turns out it was actually Metroid Prime using the Phazon suit as a vessel of sorts and mutating into a creepy reflection of our hero who set out on a search for more Phazon in order to grow stronger. This is Dark Samus. Well, the OG Samus isn't really all that impressed and follows the entity into a portal leading to a dark and twisted version of the room they were both just in. She's very quickly overpowered as the atmosphere of this dark realm is damaging to her and she's swarmed by enemies who start absorbing power from her, including many of her weapons and abilities. She narrowly escapes once again and is left with very few of her powers, needing to build herself up once more. While trying to get her bearings, she discovers the patrol ship littered with dead Marines and witnesses the last logged moments of their lives. They were holding down the fort, but as the spider-like splinters started to get possessed by the energy of dark aether, the troopers were taken out with little effort. This moment Samus takes to send off this last Marine is one of my favorite moments from her. I know Other M was trying to showcase the more gentle or compassionate side of Samus, but it resonates so much better from this one silent shot. Finally, Samus investigates a nearby temple and encounters one of the inhabitants of Aether, a Luminoth known as Umos. He explains that much like what happened with Talon 4, planet Aether was a paradise up until it was struck with a Phazon-infused meteor that rocked the planet to its core, even creating an alternate version of the world known as Dark Aether. Vile creatures known as the Ing began an assault on the Luminoth's version of the world, trying to steal the planet's light, launching both versions of this world into a struggle to obtain that energy. A race to the finish where the victor's version of the world lives on and the other dies. Umos enlists Samus's help to locate the temples of Aether, obtain the light energy from the dark versions, and return it to the light ones. Prime 2 really takes its time getting the ball rolling, but it is a neat setup. It's not all that different from, say, A Link to the Past. But while in A Link to the Past, my issue was that the temples weren't really that fun to me, and I felt like they took away from the overworld exploration. I almost have the opposite problem with this game. The biggest difference here is that the temples themselves aren't very big. Each one is like one big room with a smaller one where the device where the energy is. You're really not spending much time in them. To get inside though, you're gonna need 3 keys hidden in the Dark Aether version of each main area, stemming off from the central hub that is the temple grounds. You'll need to explore these locations and use portals to hop between the different versions of Aether. You'll collect upgrades, which you should be well used to by now, and use said upgrades to enter new parts of each area. You're gonna recognize most of these. It's mostly just your arsenal from the first game. But one ability that made it over to echoes from the 2D games is the screw attack, and it's different. You basically use it to jump in a straight line over large gaps where it works fine most of the time, and you can also use it to wall jump on certain surfaces, which works less often. You'll be jumping between light and dark aether, upgrading yourself with all the items you've come to expect, but also with some new beams and visors like in Prime 1. You can get the dark visor, letting you see otherwise invisible enemies or platforms, though it does share a problem I had with the X-ray visor in the first game. There's really not much telegraphing when this is actually useful, so I'm just constantly swapping visors in every single room just in case, and it felt like I was wasting a lot of time just trying to see if there's anything even worth looking around for. You also get the Echo Visor, a kind of creative idea where you can see sound waves, which is mostly used for deactivating sensors to open doors. You also get the Dark Suit, which looks pretty cool, but also has the added benefit of reducing how much damage the atmosphere of Dark Aether can do to you. Not much to say about it beyond that, though. Over time, you'll also obtain the Light and Dark Beams, which have an ammo count. Not the end of the world, I guess, but it's still weird. I can only imagine this limit was created because I think you'll be using these more than the other beam types from the first game. I know I did. And once you get the Annihilator Beam, which uses both types of ammo, homes in on enemies, and deals a lot of damage, yeah, I think I got way more use out of switching beam types in this game than I did in the first. You know what? I used missiles more too. Props to the combat in Prime 2. It feels so much snappier than before, but also more thoughtful. Enemies had more distinct attack and defense patterns, and I was spending more time thinking about which weapons had a greater effect on what enemies. Encounters didn't feel so mindless because there was always something to consider when going toe-to-toe with an opponent, and that makes enhancing your arsenal all the more satisfying. Like man, when you get the Seeker Missile allowing you to lock onto multiple targets and blast them all at once, I mean, it's good for opening specific doors, but barraging enemies with this is on another level. Weapons just feel good in Metroid Prime 2. On the exploration side of things though, I gotta be honest, this is not one of my favorite games to play. Actually, it's pretty low on the totem pole. It doesn't help that so many of these areas all look very drab and muted, kind of drained of the life the first game had. At first, I considered that this might have been intentional. I mean, this was a peaceful world, teeming with life until Dark Aether started sapping all that away, but then you also have to explore Dark Aether. They kind of went for an all-encompassing lifelessness rather than a contrast that I think would have been more effective. This also hurts the game because I just don't find a lot of these locations here to be very interesting or memorable. There's some to be sure, and I enjoy how a few of these locations are used creatively to hide collectibles like missile expansions and such. But running around through these locations gets old, and even now, writing this script, I barely remember many details about the planet I was just adventuring in. And it's at this point that I feel like I owe Metroid Prime 1 an apology. I complained that I thought that game had way too much backtracking, but it's got nothing on this.
Recording to logbook.
Probably unsurprisingly, Metroid was the first game of its genre I ever played. I didn't get into the series until Super Metroid, but it only took that one game to hook me. Not just in terms of gameplay and design, but even in its lore. At the time, this was assumedly the final Metroid game. We hadn't had one in so many years, and the last Metroid was dead. At that point in time, I had been speculating about how they could possibly do another game. We hadn't had a new game in probably 6 years, and in reality, we still wouldn't see another one for a couple more. I even remember one time when I was like 9 years old, calling the Nintendo support line and asking them if there would be another Metroid game, to which the representative echoed my own sentiments to me about the last Metroid being dead. A Nintendo customer service representative crushed my dreams of a Metroid 4. Luckily for us, that was a big fat lie, and we not only got a Metroid 4, but also got a new spin-off series in the form of Metroid Prime. A series like Metroid is so mysterious and eerie, yet alluring in its atmosphere and lore. And just like its in-game progression, it drives you to yearn for more and constantly wonder what more lies ahead. Metroid is a series that is near and dear to my heart, and as much as the sea of games in this genre is vast in current times, I don't think anything truly offers what the Metroid series itself does. Safe to say, as long as Samus has more adventures ahead of her, I'll be right there for the ride.
When traveling around in a Metroid game, you'll often see things that are blocked off from you that you'll need to return to after collecting certain upgrades. But it drives me crazy how, starting with Torvis Bog, this game will constantly be stopping you dead in your tracks to send you back somewhere you've already been so you can pick up a thing you couldn't get earlier and come back so you can move on a little bit before it repeats the process. This problem is only accentuated when you bring Dark Aether into this because it's just bland, colorless, and annoying versions of places you've already explored. The air itself in Dark Aether can hurt you, so there's a certain level of tension that comes from trying to hop around to all these safe zones so you don't die from just walking around, but the repetition, oh man, the incomprehensible repetition this game is plagued with. No, game, I've already been through Torvis Bog. I want to explore the Sanctuary Fortress. Don't send me back. The mind-numbing back and forth as you just pace over locations you've gone through already feels like padding. It feels like making the very concept of progression a convoluted affair, and I'm sorry I can't come up with more specific examples, but so much of this game just feels like a broken record. Similar looking areas being recycled every 15 minutes because the game can't reach a length quota without sending you running around in circles. And what a length quota it is. I'm pretty sure, almost positive even, that this is the longest game in the series, and oh boy does it feel like it. I think I spent somewhere around like 18 hours, something upwards of that, on this game. That might not sound like a ton compared to some other games, but for a Metroid title, even compared to Metroid Prime 1, that's a lot. And it all blends together, it all meanders, and at this point, I'm getting just about as redundant as the game itself. Yeah, I am not a fan of Aether. This planet sucks. It's big, it's boring, and after running through every area like 7 times, I can still barely remember any of it. But I wanted to get all of that out of the way now, because while I don't really like the world and structure of this game, there's still so much to love about it. While I'm not crazy about how you move around this place, some of what you can find here is sort of brilliant. The Space Pirates have set up shop here, and there's plenty of log entries to scan, and man, these guys are goofballs when they don't have someone like Mother Brain to keep them in check. These idiots are using dangerous equipment to mess around with each other. They've got Metroids again, but I honestly kind of feel bad for these ones. Their primary purpose here is to be used like living batteries, but there are even some Space Pirates that are trying to keep them as pets. But they're like feeding the poor things treats and food that messes around with their insides, and the little space bloods are being kept in pens that are are constantly shocking and scarring them. Let's not forget, these are dangerous, but they're not malicious or evil, they're just animals. I probably shouldn't feel so much sympathy for one of the greatest threats to the known universe, but like, look at him, he's hurt, I don't want to kill him. What's really interesting though is that these guys have been keeping tabs on Dark Samus. They confused her for the real deal at first, but over time started to recognize this creature as something else entirely, even mentioning a possible alliance. We don't see a team up of any sort in this game, but we do see Dark Samus a number of times throughout our adventure. There's this cool build-up where a dark phase-on particle effect starts taking over the areas leading up to her encounters, and there's even a couple of places where we see her decimating other enemies and relishing in her victories. The fights with her aren't terribly complicated, but they are engaging, and I like the rivalry that's built up here. Dark Samus is not invincible, but she is a threat, and she grows more powerful with every fight. She's a really cool reflection of the true Samus as well. I mean, we came to this world, scoured its terrain, and searched for power, but all for the sake of saving Aether and the Luminoth who live here. Dark Samus is doing something similar, but she came here to seek power for her own ends, showing what a deadly force Samus Aran could become if she was so self-serving and cold. Still, while her battles aren't the most remarkable thing in the world, so many of the other boss fights in this game just knock it out of the park. Many of them hold and use Samus' stolen powers, and you'll have to best these abilities to get them back. If that reminds you of another Metroid game, that's good, because I'm gonna call this little trend the fusion principle. My favorite boss is probably Quadraxis. This guy is awesome. You gotta shoot down his legs and wait for his head to detach. Then you use the Echo Visor to interrupt the control signal the main body is sending to it. That's such a cool way to use your abilities, but it doesn't even stop there. Even getting some use out of the spider ball, where you have to latch onto the legs of the main body and rocket yourself into the floating head. It's all such a good use of the player's acquired abilities, and I had such a big dumb smile on my face during this entire battle. And not every boss fight is the best. The Spider Guardian was kind of a pain, it really just took a while, but I hear it's even worse in the GameCube version. You can mark this as my own feelings as a reviewer for this particular video, but I don't really know what the exact difference is in this fight, but from the sounds of it, that's a couple of points to the Wii release right there. The action was enough to keep me going, and in time, I was able to recover the light energy and return it to all 3 temples, which means I was finally ready to report back to Umos and travel to the final area, the Sky Temple, and reclaim its power from the Emperor Ing, the leader of the dark creatures threatening this planet. Wait, Sky Temple keys? Wait, you mean like... Oh, come on! Really? After all of that, we're just going back and redoing the artifact hunt? The worst part of Metroid Prime 1? And get this, they made it worse. Sure, in the first game, you could scan the statues at the impact crater and they would give you some kind of helpful hints on how to find the artifacts. And there's something like that here, along with the mercy of only needing to collect 9 endgame items rather than 12, but the balance shifts right back to annoying with how they're obtained. Get the clue to the location of a key bearer, try to use this cryptic hint to track said key bearer down, and then keep that place in mind, because you're gonna have to go find a portal, hop into Dark Aether, return to the same room, and scour the whole location with the Dark Visor and find and destroy this stupid creature holding the key. This game is already so much longer than it needs to be, and tacking on a worse version of a stupid fetch quest few people like to begin with isn't just unneeded, it's bad. This was a bad inclusion. I was at least relieved to hear that after knowing where these are, some of them can be obtained early on a second playthrough, but where I said in the first game that you could probably stumble on a few Chozo artifacts on accident just through thorough exploration, the same does not apply here. Especially considering that you get the light suit at this part of the game, which means you take no damage from Dark Aether's atmosphere and can tread through pools of some poisonous substance, and yeah, I love this design. It's such a cool look for Samus, and getting to see it helped make me feel a little better about this part, but it also acts as a key to a lock that's keeping these Sky Temple keys scattered all over places you've already been in, again adding to the tedium and redundancy as something you can only obtain here at the end of the game where it damages the pacing the most. The light suit is a cool reward, and the ability to fast travel between temples helps, but they also feel like solutions to problems that didn't need to exist to begin with. Okay, that's enough whining. Once you collect the Sky Temple keys, you can travel to a sanctuary in Dark Aether and take on the leader of the monsters you've faced, the Emperor Ing. Like the other boss battles in this game, I've gotta sing some praises here. This is a great fight with several phases that all require you to use your abilities in creative ways. I've been especially impressed by how effective the Prime games have made the Morph Ball in combat scenarios, and the light and dark beams are put to really good use here. Once it's defeated, Samus absorbs the light energy stolen by the monstrosity and... hey! This is a remix of the escape music from the NES game. Dude, that's kind of awesome. As you sprint out of the area and try to return to Light Aether, however, you're cornered by Dark Samus, who's become grotesque and unstable from all the phazon she's taken in. One last encounter, one last fight. Take her down before the counter reaches 0, and this moment right here, where Dark Samus is beaten and reaches out to her light counterpart, is Dark Samus feeling regret? Remorse? Is she trying to understand what power Samus has used against her, or is she trying to reach out for some glimmer of mercy? I have no idea, and I feel like nobody ever brings up this moment, but I really like it, and I think there's a lot to unpack from this one shot, and I would love to theorize with people about it. No time for that, though. Dark Aether collapses, with Samus just narrowly making her escape. The light suit has faded, no longer needed, and the hibernating Luminoth awaken, offering their gratitude to the bounty hunter, who simply walks off into the sun with a silent gesture that her work is done, and she's off to the next adventure. Once again, you get a bonus part of this ending if you collect 75% or more of the items in the game, with Samus showing off her Zero suit before jumping into her ship, and like, I get that this is a staple of the series, but something about this little extra scene feels really awkward to me. Personally, I feel like the ending of this game is just stronger without it. And once again, by collecting 100% of the items in the game, we get one last scene after the credits. But all it shows is a quick shot of Dark Samus rematerializing in the middle of space. Was I a little scatterbrained in this review? Yeah, probably, but there's a lot here, and a lot of it is good. That's the hard part about this review. I like this game. There's stuff about it I love. I mean, the action is some of the best in this series, and I wanted to talk about that, but when the stuff that doesn't work for me revolves around structure, it's hard for that stuff not to come out more. Metroid Prime 2 is so cool. I love the action, I love the ideas, and some concepts from the first game are fleshed out so well here. Scanning the corpses of Galactic Federation soldiers and Luminoth that died before and reading about their final moments adds a level of dread and horror to the experience I love, but between all of my favorite parts of this game is a world that refuses to be explored in an organic way. I don't regret playing this, not at all, and I would recommend it to more hardcore Metroid fans, but this isn't one that I'll be returning to for quite some time. I'm glad the team took the time to experiment, and I'm thrilled with the parts of this game that do work, but I can't say that I fully love Metroid Prime 2 Echoes. You know, there actually was a multiplayer mode to this game too. I mean, it wasn't all that great, it was kind of bare bones to be honest. A couple of players could get together, control Samus, run around arenas with most of your abilities from the main game. You could get points by either shooting each other to death or shooting each other to pick up tokens. It was, not all that memorable, and I didn't have a whole lot to say about it, but it's not the last game in the series that would have a certain emphasis on multiplayer, so let's get into that more next time as we take a look at Metroid Prime Hunters. But until then, I hope you're enjoying Metroid Month. Remember that my top tier patrons get to see these videos 2 days early. You can find me on Twitter, Twitch, Discord, Sunset City, whichever you prefer. Links in the description, and of course, as always, spread the word, tell your friends, and until we see each other again, thank you so much for watching. See you next mission.
Hello.
While the Metroid series always had a certain emphasis on exploration, it can't be denied that it carried plenty of potential for action, something games in the series would focus on more and more as time went on. It's part of the reason why the subgenre is moving on from the term Metroidvania over to search action, which sounds so lame in comparison. Yeah, I'm probably not going to be using that. But with a sci-fi setting, cool weapons and upgrades, it was only a matter of time before someone saw the action side of Metroid and decided to take it in a competitive direction. Actually, this started as soon as Retro was developing Metroid Prime 1. There were plans to add multiplayer to Samus's first 3D outing, but they didn't quite make the cut. Still, the idea was later carried over to Metroid Prime 2, and it was nothing special. It's a very basic and not very fleshed out multiplayer experience, entertaining for an hour or two, but I'll probably never touch this mode again. That said, after the release of Echoes, a smaller Western studio in Nintendo's pocket called Nintendo Software Technology, or NST, was working on a portable Metroid Prime game for the upcoming Nintendo DS. In fact, the launch version of the handheld actually came with a demo cartridge called First Hunt that showed off what the game would be like in single player, a trailer for the full title, and a multiplayer mode which kind of ended up stealing the show, which in turn shifted the development of the game to focus more on the multiplayer aspects of the final release. What resulted is one of the strangest games in Metroid's lineup, but also one of its most unique. So how does it hold up today? Well, spoilers ahead, I guess? I don't know, is there really anything in this game to spoil? I'll throw it up there anyway. This is Metroid Prime Hunters. Hunters is probably remembered most these days for its multiplayer, but I actually want to touch on the single-player campaign first. This was originally the main focus of development, and I still find it kind of fascinating. NST wanted to create an experience on the level of the console-based Metroid games using the hardware of the Nintendo DS, and honestly, with what's here, I think they could have come close if that had been the game's mission statement through to the end. Between the events of Prime 1 and 2, a telepathic transmission is sent out from the cold depths of space, citing that the key to ultimate power is residing in a region of the Tetra Galaxy known as the Limbic Cluster. This message made its way to some of the most deadly bounty hunters among the stars, and the Galactic Federation sends Samus Aran to track down this ultimate power before the other hunters do, and if necessary, destroy it. As you begin your investigation on the Celestial Archives, you discover that the Limbic Cluster was once a peaceful paradise until it was struck by a comet from which a dark creature called Garia emerged and laid waste to the civilization. One for the bingo card, I guess. So far, every game in the Prime series has revolved around this sort of setup, but I mean, it's not like the main series is devoid of any redundancy. And it's not like this game doesn't have any original ideas. This is actually the first game in the series where you get to do a bit of planet hopping. See, after failing to stop Goria's destruction of their galaxy, the Olympics basically gave up their mortal forms and became a form of telepathic energy to ensnare the beast in a prison kept in the Infinity Void. To gain access to the Void, you need to obtain 8 keys known as Octoliths that are scattered across the Limbic Cluster. You'll need to travel to each location in your gunship, find 3 artifacts in the given area that will activate a teleporter, travel to a boss room, kill it, retrieve the Octolith, and travel to the next destination. This is a very simple gameplay loop, but the way it's played may look pretty familiar. You know, I was already planning to cover remakes and spin-offs in the series next year, so if you think I've forgotten about Metroid Prime Pinball, frankly, I'm offended that you would think that, but no, I'm just covering that next time. But why treat this differently than, say, Federation Force, which I'll also be covering in next year's Metroid Month? Mostly just the overall gameplay style. I actually think Federation Force is a fine game, and in a few ways I think it's better than this one, but it also has a more defined way of playing it that separates it from the playstyle of the main Prime games. But Hunters? No. When NST set out to make a Metroid Prime game on the DS, they actually did a really good job of capturing what that would look like. The first-person view, morph ball, platforming, and of course, scanning absolutely everything to get more information on it are present here, and they are handled about the same way as they were in the console games. The biggest and most obvious difference is going to be in direct control. There is a dual mode, letting you fire with the shoulder button, move with the D-pad, and controlling the camera with the face buttons, but it feels really unnatural. Definitely a hindrance if you're looking for any semblance of precision during a fast-paced firefight. I'd really only recommend this on emulators where you can map the face buttons to an analog stick, which still isn't perfect, but it's miles better than this. Otherwise, you can apply the stylus controls, which have you using the D-pad for moving and shoulder button for firing like in dual mode, but your camera is controlled with the stylus and touchscreen. The level of accuracy that comes with this is actually pretty surprising. I really didn't have any trouble hitting my target, and it felt like I was always in full control of my movements. A common criticism I hear of this control setup is hand cramping, and yeah, I can't deny that on smaller DS systems, I can definitely feel this after a couple of hours. But surprisingly, this doesn't feel like too much of an issue on the larger ones, like a new 3DS XL, or even more surprisingly, on the Wii U. I don't really have a good emulating and recording setup on this computer, part of the reason why I'm trying to upgrade, so I recorded this playthrough on the Wii U Virtual Console, and somehow I think this is the most comfortable way I've played this game. Wouldn't expect that from such a hunky piece of tablet, but hey, I guess you never know until you try. But yeah, the way you move around, shoot stuff down, curl into a ball, and roll around through narrow passageways, it all feels on point, but when the development focus shifted from single to multiplayer, the game's design took a hit, and I don't mean in the controls. This game really is impressive. I mean, just look at this. Like, I don't care about all the pixelization and crap, no, just really consider the fact that this was running on a Nintendo DS back in 2006. It's kind of remarkable what the team was able to accomplish here. Some of these environments and set pieces actually caught me by surprise. I can really tell that they wanted to craft a full world, or I guess multiple worlds here, and while the visuals have certainly aged, I can admire this in the same way I can still look at Metal Gear Solid 1 or Silent Hill and just appreciate the magic performed on this older tech. But man, is there nothing to actually find here. And I mean that. These artifacts to the teleporters you have to find in each location are sometimes hidden behind some simple puzzles of sorts, but you're never really going out of your way to find them. They're all just kind of along your most obvious path, waiting to be picked up. Outside of that, extra abilities and such? No, not in Hunters. You start the game with your morph ball, bombs, charge beam, missiles, and various suit, but you're never gonna collect anything other than missile expansions and energy tanks. Not that you don't run into some company from time to time along the way. As you travel to each new location, you have a chance of running into one of the other 6 hunters trying to locate Gorilla. The first of these encounters has a fun sense of build-up, poking around the desolate celestial archives until your ship alerts you that you're not alone. Move on a few rooms until you run into Candon, a bioweapon who's trying to beat you to the prize. You'll encounter 5 others in your journey: Weevil, Spire, Nuxus, Trace, and the most popular out of the bunch, Silex. Each of these characters is sporting a special type of beam weapon. Trace has a sniper laser, Weevil has something akin to a grenade launcher, and Spire does too, just like with fire. Candon has this laser that can be charged up into a sphere capable of disorienting whoever it hits, Nuxus has a freezing laser, effectively the ice beam, and Silex has the powers of Emperor Palpatine himself, using a shot coil that can electrocute his enemies into submission. They all have their own little variations of the morph ball too. I imagine this was a choice made for the multiplayer to help even out the moveset a bit. Some feel more natural than others, like the cyborg Weevil can separate from his legs, which turn into a turret, leaving his upper body to chase after his opponent. Others are a little sillier, like Nuxus just kind of tucks in and spins around like a Beyblade. Trace has the best one though. I mean, his mobile form is honestly kind of terrifying. Trace is also one of the few other hunters that has a really unique ability. Being a sniper and all, he can cloak himself and go invisible, making him really deadly. And not just to you either. In one instance, I traveled to a new location and ran into these guys already locked in a fight. I mean, it was scripted, but it was a cool idea. It helped sell the idea that this was a bounty hunter free-for-all. They aren't just competing against Samus. Now, while each of these guys is given a bit of a backstory, I think Weevil and Silex stand out the most to me. Weevil was actually a space pirate who battled Samus back on planet Zebes, who was left for dead and turned into a cyborg, later becoming a bounty hunter. But the one guy that everyone seems to remember the most is Silex. There's a lot of mystery behind this dude. Like Weevil, he seems to have some kind of bone to pick with Samus, but also with the Galactic Federation as a whole. Most of his tech is actually stolen from them, and when you encounter him, he toys around with you a lot, even beckoning you to an open area where he can call his ship down to help him in his fight. I get the popularity. This guy is really cool, and this isn't even the last game he appears in. In fact, there's been discussions in the past about focusing a game on a struggle between Silex and Samus, and that might actually be the setup for Metroid Prime 4, but we'll have to wait and see. Outside of your initial encounters with each hunter, you can run into them when returning to previous areas, but they're much easier to take out in round 2. I think they can even steal an octolith from you that you'll have to go get back from them if they beat you, but I'm not 100% sure. I don't think I've ever actually lost to these guys. In a roundabout way, these guys are linked to an attempt to make up for the lack of upgrades to find, as you can actually locate their special weapons around the Olympic cluster, which will let you open color-coded doors to reach new areas, but outside of fights with the only 2 overworld bosses in this game, which are just variations of the same creature that have weaknesses specific to hot or cold, I really only use these for opening specific doors. It doesn't really feel like a very efficient addition to my moveset. And oh boy, speaking of variations to bosses, the Guardians protecting the Octoliths are just 2 bosses recycled across 8 encounters with small additions to their attack patterns. I remember thinking this guy was kind of neat at first, but he really loses all appeal the 4th time you walk in to take him out. And that's really about it. This does not really feel like that much of an adventure. It's more just a giant fetch quest. You're not really obtaining new stuff to help you gain more control over what you encounter or where you go. This really does just feel like one of the most outright linear experiences in the series. Even the exploration is just serviceable, I suppose. I was really disappointed when I saw something I thought I could interact with in a meaningful way, only to discover that no, this just doesn't have that personal interactivity of the larger Prime games. And I mean, it's not a terrible time. I was always engaged on some level, but I don't know that I can say I was ever really having fun. I just sort of waded through the checklist of objectives until I got all the Octoliths, went out of my way to scan every portion of something called the Olympic Prophecy, which kind of acts like the Chozo or Luminoth lore, but holds a significant role in getting to the true ending of the game. Once the way to Gorilla is open, Samus enters his prison, and after seeing all the other hunters get taken out pretty easily, it's time to go to work. If you just beat the boss here and now, he'll still pretty much destroy everyone, and it's a bad ending. To get the true ending, you have to follow the instructions of the Olympic Prophecy and hit these things around the arena in a certain sequence with the matching color of special weapon to unlock the second phase. Well, after you finish the first phase, which is a horrible boss fight. This battle sucks so much. It is so tedious, and it takes forever. It's mostly just spamming his shoulders until he lets out his core to destroy it, and that also takes forever. Rinse and repeat until you enter the second phase, pick up the Omega Cannon, and blow him to Kingdom Come. Samus escapes, the other hunters escape, the spirits of the Olympic offer their gratitude to Samus, and okay, that haircut actually looks really good on her, and wait a minute, yeah, the ending of this game has nothing to do with the completion time or how many items you collect. It's all just based around knowing this secret combination that you can just Google. It really feels like this game had the idea ideas and the foundation to create an experience comparable to its console counterparts, but it's also clear this part of the game just didn't get the attention it needed to really flourish, and sadly, the other thing that people seem to remember the most about this game isn't really around anymore.
Recording to logbook.
Metroid Prime Hunters blew me away the first time I played it. I'm not someone who's particularly into Metroid Prime or really Metroid at all, but if you look at where both handheld games and first-person shooters were when this came out, it seemed like Hunters was going to be a game changer. The Game Boy Advance had a handful of very clunky first-person shooters that often ran poorly and weren't particularly good, so the genre really lived on home consoles and PC. When they did appear on handheld, digital input limitations alone would hold them back a lot. Then when Hunters dropped, or when its demo dropped earlier, its silky smooth frame rate and particularly its stylus aiming raised the bar way higher than any other handheld FPS before it. It just felt so intuitive to pick up and play, and landing precise shots felt amazing. It was more comparable to playing a shooter with a mouse and keyboard than a Game Boy's D-pad or even a dual analog controller. Fond memories of staying up all night with my mates playing multiplayer deathmatch in Hunters will always stick with me. Like, there was no need to haul our computers around for LAN parties to play Quake or Unreal Tournament when we could get a similar experience on our DS's, and for that brief moment in time, at least to the child version of myself, it really did feel like the DS and handheld consoles could have had a bright future with FPS games. In hindsight, that wasn't really the case, and Hunters ended up being one of the best FPS games the DS or even the 3DS ever saw, with nothing really surpassing it, but I'll always cherish the time I had with this game, and I'll never forget just how incredible it was to play for the very first time.
Well, Mini-Me said it best. The multiplayer was the breadwinner here. You didn't even need multiple copies of this game to play with others. They could just use the download play on their DS systems to hop into your lobby and join the fun, but obviously, creating a lobby across multiple cartridges led to more features being available from different play modes between the stock-based survival mode, the capture the flag mode with bounty, King of the Hill, the Prime Hunter mode where the first person to make a kill becomes the Prime Hunter and everyone else has to take that player out to become the new Prime themselves. And of course, with a setup like the one this game has, what would even be the point if it didn't give you the opportunity to play as the other hunters? You didn't exactly have all their weapons and abilities to work with, those could be obtained around the battlefield in each match, but it was still awesome getting to mess around with their different forms, run around with their awesome designs, and the fast-paced gameplay just really kept things fun. Now, I'm no expert on multiplayer games, especially not shooters, but this was one game that I spent a lot of time on back in the day. In fact, this was one of the first times I ever got to experience online multiplayer. Metroid Prime Hunters supported Wi-Fi connectivity, and with it, you could compete with other players around the world. No voice chat, at least not that I ever knew of, but we did find other ways to communicate with each other through actions. And while I never really got good at this game, I loved it. I was heartbroken when Nintendo shut down the online servers for DS titles, but I was there in the final moments for this game, playing with other hunters and enjoying the controlled chaos of one of my favorite multiplayer shooters I've played to this day. I like to think something like this could be brought back one day. Like with Metroid moving up right now, a multiplayer-focused spin-off doesn't seem like a terrible idea, but we'll have to see if something like that ever happens. Maybe there's a way to hop into some online matches through emulation? I'm not really sure, but it is sad because the single player really isn't enough to carry this game. It is impressive, pretty much a technical marvel for its time, but with those servers shut down, it's become a relic of days long past, and a rather barren single-player campaign that I had a decent enough time revisiting, but I don't know that I'll be going back to. As much as I respect this little game, I just can't recommend Metroid Prime Hunters. Now, some of the ideas that were presented in Hunters wouldn't stay trapped on that one little cartridge alone, and they would make their way into a game that wouldn't be far behind. Let's dig into those features next week as we take a look at Metroid Prime 3 Corruption. Until then, remember that my top tier patrons get to see these videos 2 days early. You can find me on Twitter, Twitch, Discord, Sunset City, whichever you prefer. Links in the description, and of course, as always, spread the word, tell your friends, and until we see each other again, thank you so much for watching. See you next mission. It cannot be overstated just what a difference Metroid Prime made to the whole franchise. Its success helped bring attention to games in the series new and old, and between Prime 1 and 2, Metroid Fusion, Zero Mission, and even a couple of spin-offs on the side, the franchise was seeing a level of popularity that it hadn't enjoyed since it launched. But Retro Studios knew it was time to bring the Phase-On saga to an end, and with a new Nintendo home console on the horizon, they started plotting out what this thrilling conclusion would look like. They had some big ideas too, open world elements, massive landscapes to explore, steady 60 FPS, but system performance really wasn't at the top of Nintendo's priority list when it came to developing the Wii, and many of these ideas had to be scaled back a bit. I wouldn't really call this the most popular Metroid Prime game, but I haven't really talked to anybody who actively hates it or anything like that, so why are people a bit more mixed on this one? Well, let's find out together as we take a look at what was originally supposed to be the final chapter in the Metroid Prime saga with Metroid Prime 3: Corruption. Motion controls. Not my favorite thing in the world, but let's not pretend they don't have their uses depending on how they're utilized. Gyro aiming is a good example, probably one of the best ways to introduce precision aiming for controller-based shooters. But Nintendo's white monolith of industrialized joy has no such subtleties. No, here you point a remote at the screen with a controller that could sprain your wrist and probably confuse your grandma. As I've said before though, I actually like the way the motion controls work for the Metroid Prime games, so playing through all three of them on the Metroid Prime Trilogy collection really was ideal for me. I wanted to go into a bit of this collection's history and features, but there's actually a pretty good amount of details here, and I think that maybe I'll try doing a video all about it on its own one day. But for now, let's just focus on the game proper and the differences that it brought to the table. Metroid Prime 3 was set to send the trilogy out in a big way, and it was bringing a lot of changes to the formula that its predecessors laid out, and it's easy to see those as soon as the game starts. It's quickly established that Dark Samus managed to survive, using the Phase-On stored in a space pirate ship to gain physical form again, and she's probably ready for some mischief. Samus wakes up, clearly having some kind of nightmare or vision of the villain's revival before being summoned by the Galactic Federation fleet for a debriefing on their command ship, the GFS Olympus. It won't take long for a player to realize just how much of an emphasis this game has on motion controls. You point around the screen to aim your arm cannon, but you also use it in your ship to mess around with buttons and knobs that are mostly just decoration, and then outside of your ship for basically everything else. How about manually typing passwords into keypads or twisting and pulling devices to unlock doors? Here, rotate this canister and pull it out. Maybe later in the game when you get the grapple beam, you'll start using the nunchuck to pull away at grates or panels, even ripping parts of enemies off during combat. This is kinda jarring, even after playing the last two games with the motion controls of their Wii versions. See, there it felt like a quality of life feature that added a better way to control aiming and shooting, but some of the stuff in Prime 3 is just intrusive. There's plenty of interactions in this game that could have served the same purpose and led to the same result with less time wasted if they were maybe animations mapped to a button press rather than all this. I say all that as someone who actually likes that feature of the game. I like the extra level of interactivity, but that's because I'm weird, and even then I got tired of it eventually. Plus, I know the common consensus is that these often break the pacing of otherwise simple tasks, and I completely agree. At most, this should have been an option that could have been toggled, but that's not exactly how Nintendo was running the Wii show back in the day. This wasn't the only change the Federation flagship brings to the forefront though. There's like people here. Like a lot of people, and you can talk with them too. Full voice acting for every character, not just important cast members. You can walk around the ship and bug the troopers working there, and some are a little too busy to chat, but others recognize Samus and actually have some respect for her.
Did you really take out an entire planet of space pirates?
Yes, you are correct. I am awesome, thank you. But once you meet up with Admiral Dane in the command room, you're introduced to Rundus, Gore, and Samus. Hey, wait a minute.
Andreda, enough.
These other bounty hunters have been called here for an urgent mission, as several of the Federation supercomputers have been recently infected by a space pirate virus and need to be purified with something of a digital vaccine. What kind of supercomputers are these exactly? These are called Aurora units, big organic brain-like artificial intelligence systems that run a pretty huge part of the Federation systems throughout the galaxy. Look at these things. Why are we still doing this? How hard is it, guys? Just stop making mother brains. It's really not that difficult. Not far into their discussion, though, the fleet and the nearby planet Norian are attacked by pirate forces, and after escaping the ship and knocking out a few pirates along the way, Samus makes her way down to Norian and has to fight her way to power on the planet's defense systems in the middle of this giant battle. In fact, this is a bit organized for the space pirates, don't you think? I mean, we already established in the last game that this whole group is rife with buffoonery, and yeah, they're not acting alone here. It turns out Dark Samus has found a way to use Phase-On to corrupt and control the minds of others, and she's done that with the entire space pirate armada. She's even discovered a way to militarize those Phase-On comets that infected Talon 4 and Aether, and is using these meteors, or Leviathan seeds as they're now called, to infect whole systems at once. And one of these seeds is headed straight for Norian, so the bounty hunters team up with Samus to get the defense systems systems back online, Ridley shows up and we have one of the coolest fights with him in the whole series. Like, actually, look at this nonsense, it's insane. And we group back up with the others to use the plant's defense laser to destroy the seeds before it makes impact. This is where you get to see other hunters in their best form. These guys aren't exactly three-dimensional characters or anything, but I wouldn't exactly call them flat. They have some fun interactions with Samus, and I think there's enough here to make them seem legitimately cool. Especially Rundus. I like Rundus.
If we don't make it to the top in time, we can kiss this planet goodbye.
Hey, relax. We're the good guys. Justice will prevail and all that stuff. Right, Samus?
Yeah, no, this guy's great. Your plans for activating the defense system are interrupted though, as none other than Dark Samus arrives to break up the party. The team of course tries to put her down, but she's barely phased, and she hits them all with some kind of phase-on blast. She takes off, apparently satisfied with her work, but Samus is able to reactivate the laser just in time to destroy the Leviathan seed at the last second before losing consciousness. Samus wakes up 1 month later to find out that the Galactic Federation rescued her and outfitted her armor with devices capable of helping her through her newfound condition. After the blast from Dark Samus, she's been corrupted by Phazon and her entire body is now generating the stuff on its own. The Phazon Enhancement Device, or PED, will help her control the Phazon coursing through her body and even use it as a weapon, introducing the Hyper Mode mechanic. By sacrificing an energy tank worth of health, you can enter Hyper Mode, ramping up your attack power significantly. You can absolutely tear through enemies with this, but it does come at a cost of your health, so there's a bit of a risk-reward system going on here. Or I guess that was the idea anyway, but we'll tackle that in just a minute. While Samus was knocked out, the other hunters were discovered to have been affected by Dark Samus's attack in a similar way and were given PED modifications themselves before being sent out to 3 planets, Brio, Elysia, and the Pirate Homeworld, as each location has been infected with a Leviathan seed, corrupting the entire world and everything living on them. After losing contact with the other hunters, the Federation gets kinda concerned and sends Samus to check in on them, and this is where the more standard Metroid playstyle comes in. This might be the longest tutorial section or prologue in the entire series, but I also think it's one of my favorites. It does run in conflict with a lot of the design methods of previous Metroid games, but it also has this cinematic angle that helps keep everything exciting, fresh, and engaging. But is it enough to carry through the entire adventure?
Recording to logbook.
Man, I've been playing Metroid since before I knew how to walk. My sister had a copy of Super Metroid and a Super Nintendo that she would bring over to the house sometimes. I didn't understand any of it. I mean, my only understandings of side-scrolling video games that had shooting in it was like Mega Man, and this game was nothing like Mega Man, aside from first glance. It was one of those games that fired synapses in my head, and it was sort of impossible to forget, even though it took me like 10 more years to finally sit down and play through it all the way. And even by that point, I had already beaten like Metroid Prime on the GameCube, which, you know, scared the shit out of me when I was little, but I would just suck it up and play it muted. It introduced me to this whole genre that we know today as Metroidvania. I didn't know what to call it back then, but I loved it, and it was something that I cherished very closely because of this childhood-like fascination that I've always had with the series. And in that context, it's just the gift that keeps on giving as you grow up and understand a lot of what these games have with their themes and storytelling. It felt like it grew up with me, you know? And that's something I can't say about a lot of video games I've played. I never really liked getting lost in video games before I found Metroid, and Metroid just completely turned me around with that. The idea of basically checking every nook and cranny of a world in a video game was something that didn't sound fun when I was younger, and now if it's done right, which it usually is in Metroid, it's something that I almost look forward to in a way. Putting your feet into Samus's shoes as she powers up throughout like every single one of her games creates this bond between herself and the player in a way that I don't feel a lot. And my other favorite game of all time, Mega Man X, is something that also does this, and yet I come back to Super Metroid more often these days. I don't know, it's kind of crazy.
Like in Hunters, you can use your ship to travel between planets, though only the first 2 will be open to you at first, and you can only really get far into Elysia after completing the main portion of Brio first. But as you progress, you'll often discover new weapons and upgrades that you're used to by now, and that will open up the way to new locations, but some areas are opened up just by reaching the end of these smaller pocket areas. Like there's 3 different areas on Brio alone to explore, and you'll have to hop into your ship and travel to each one. Thankfully, there's plenty of spots for you to drop off your ship and take off with it, so it's never too crazy out of the the way. I think my only real complaint is the fact that every single time you get off your ship after traveling to a new location, the Samus entrance theme has to play, and it gets pretty old really fast with how often you'll be hopping around. It's a great jingle, but overusing it like this kind of hurts how special it is, and the last thing you want to do is make it annoying to the player given how iconic it's supposed to be at the start of an adventure or when you're picking up a game again after loading a save. In terms of stuff you can find around in these worlds, it's mostly going to be stuff you recognize. There's really basic stuff between your morph ball and its various abilities to the returning screw attack that functions like it did in Prime 2 but works infinitely better when wall jumping. They really cleaned this up a lot. And then the grapple beam really sees a lot of use. You'll be swinging over tons of gaps, pulling down a crap load of panels, and then you get some additions to this ability, like using the grapple to drain energy from devices or overload them. You'll also get some upgrades to your beam, allowing you to burn through stuff like ice or even through objects, but unlike previous games, you don't switch between beam types. The effects simply stack, same with the new missile types, and I'm fine with it. This game has enough going on as is, and I don't feel like anything was really lost here. They do attempt to give your gunship a bit more utility, which I guess makes sense as you'll be using it to travel around a lot, but like, I can count how many times I use this airstrike function on my ship with one hand. So why in the world are there missile expansions for this vessel? You know, when I was playing this game for the first time and then I saw that you gotta mess around with the interior of the ship and then you start getting like missile expansions and stuff, I thought we were gonna get some ship combat, like it was Battlefront or something, but no, that never happens. So what, were these to pad out the amount of collectibles? I think yes. You do get to command your ship to carry and move around certain objects though, so yeah, you know, that's cool. Maybe one controversial idea is later on in the game, as you can find this Chozo Observatory where you can launch satellites into space that will reveal the locations of items and upgrades on your map, but I think it's a fine inclusion, honestly. You have to go out of your way to find and launch these things to begin with, and even referring to your map, you still have to be observant and put some thought into where each item is. Plus, some of the 2D games do this by default, I think starting with Fusion. Like, the map will have little indicators on whether or not a room has a hidden item, and even if you've picked it up or not yet. This really is not a big deal. Now, a criticism I'm a bit more understanding towards is how the main Aurora unit is really good about telling you where to go. Yeah, I guess to bring up Fusion again, it does have that same principle of showing you where to go but not exactly how to get there, but it really does feel like autopilot at times, or at least like they're walking you through more than they need to. I get accessibility, I'm fine with that, but there really should have been an option to just turn it off from the beginning of the game. Back to your main armory though, they do also try to enhance your phazon arsenal throughout the game, essentially granting you new abilities after destroying the bosses guarding each Leviathan seed, like a morph ball attack, hyper missiles, hyper grapple, and of course, these are all accessed through something we mentioned before, that being hyper mode. In all honesty, hyper mode is kind of busted in the early portions of the game because of how quickly you can take down opponents, even making some boss encounters a complete joke. You also earn health back from most defeated enemies, so the only real risk is just not getting yourself killed while in hyper mode itself, because you'll more than likely be up to full health again shortly after exiting it. And sure, you're not invincible during this mode, but you're still pretty sturdy, and taking damage is not a concern if you can all but one-shot everything in the room before they can even land a hit on you. It's a cool idea, but it's very easily abused, which might not even be a problem in and of itself, but there are specific enemies, some that can even use hyper mode themselves, that take like 5 years to kill with normal attacks, and you're basically bottlenecked into turning on the cool blue shooty mode. Now to be fair, I think this does end up evening out in the game's second half, where you're surrounded by strong enemies more often and have more energy tanks to burn through, because I had some really close calls during these fights. Frankly, I let myself get cocky and burn through energy tanks too fast in an attempt to use stronger attacks. I think this is where hyper mode was really effective, and where I was ultimately won over by the mechanic. It's just a shame that it took so long to get there. You do get the X-ray visor at one point, but it's pretty late into the game and only gets so much use. I think this game really was trying to put a larger emphasis on the faster pace, action-heavy aspects these smaller and more numerous locations have to offer. And yeah, while this game does send you trekking back to previous areas a lot, kind of like in Prime 2, I minded a bit less here because of how much easier it is to choose which locations to travel to, and because I just find these locations more interesting in general. The team was pushing to take more advantage of the hardware here, and while the Wii isn't as powerful as they had hoped, it did allow them to use higher quality audio samples for stuff like voice acting, music, and the sound effects that help bring these environments to life, but also higher quality textures and loading times. In fact, every texture in this game was handcrafted, and the detail is great. For a game pushing 14 years, I think Corruption holds up up really well visually, and they spent a lot of time on maybe less locations than what Aether had to offer, but more interesting and memorable ones. Seriously, Elysia brings you over to Sky Town, this ancient Chozo city that's suspended high up in the air, actually kind of beating Bioshock Infinite to these rail riding sections. These are some of my favorite locations in this series, and I can really appreciate not only how incredible they look, but also how well they're structured. They have that personal interactivity that I was missing from Hunters, where you're really just using the environment to your advantage. That, and I just appreciate when a game knows how to let you organically create shortcuts in case you have to loop back around certain locations. I do wish I could say the same for the bosses in this game. I think Prime 3 has a great pace for action overall, but these decisive encounters are lacking a bit. They're cool, don't get me wrong, but I can't think of any boss encounters in this game that were on the same level of thoughtful design as Quadraxis from Echoes. That battle really did set a standard for me. Okay, actually, an exception might be the Ridley fights. The first is a huge, exciting set piece that's meant to pull you into the beginning of the game and show off one of the most memorable duels with this creature. But he shows up again in the Pirate Homeworld's Leviathan Seed, and it's not quite at the top of my list of Ridley fights, but it's a real good one, and I can appreciate that they elected to use a new battle theme for this second encounter, since they already used the main Ridley theme during the first time you fight him. And hey, there's another thing I love. This soundtrack is great. It really does a wonderful job of pulling you into each location and the events surrounding it. But I think one of the best places it's used is in one of the more tragic areas of the game. Remember how the other hunters were sent out to investigate the Leviathan seeds and to destroy them? Well, the reason they never responded to the Federation after arriving at each location is because the Phazon in their bodies has corrupted them, allowing Dark Samus to take them over and forcing you to fight them. It's sad having to fight these guys after working alongside them, and infuriating to watch them snap back to their senses after your scuffle, only to be murdered by Dark Samus and have their energy drained by her. The guy that got it the worst is Rundus, who you actually have to fight before any of the others. At first, it looks like he's helping you fight off some space pirates like before, but no, he's just clearing the stage to take care of you. The track that plays during this fight is perfect. It's not as triumphant as a lot of other boss tracks. It's intense, but also has this really sad undertone to it. Like, the game knows I don't want to fight Rundus. I like Rundus, but it has to be done, and just when it seems like you might get your friend back, yeah, I am out for blood. It's kind of haunting seeing these guys each get taken over by the Phazon, but what's even worse is that it's happening to Samus the entire game. As you progress through your adventure, absorb Phazon and use it to your advantage, the corruption slowly overtakes your body. You can even see Samus's face anytime you use the scan visor, and it progressively gets darker, grislier, and more inhuman. Big shout out to Finalizer on Twitter for letting me use this video that captured the effect in motion. It's crazy seeing just how close she comes to losing herself, really bone-chilling. She has a rough time with it too. The first huge spike of Phazon causes her to shake up the rules a bit and take off her helmet right there in the middle of the game, and just... yeah, it's taken a toll. It makes it all the more clear that you need to stop Dark Samus and bring her crusade to an end. After destroying each Leviathan seed, you're informed that the seeds have all been sent from a single area, far off in a dark corner of space on a planet of pure Phazon energy known as Phase. This is the source of the evil substance that's poisoned the planets we've traveled to in all three Prime games, and now it's time to bring it to an end, using the wormhole technology of the seeds against Dark Samus and leading the Federation to a grand assault on the heart of this trilogy's conflict. Just as long as you have enough items for this game's last-minute fetch quest. Yes, just like with Prime 1 and 2, you do require a certain set of items to be able to access the final portion of this game, but I'm not freaking out about it this time because this is the best way it's handled in the series. The Federation lost track with a ship known as the GFS Valhalla, where an Aurora unit was stolen and where you'll find codes needed to gain control of a Leviathan seed orbiting the pirate homeworld so you can use it to open a wormhole to Phase. However, to access the room with the codes, you'll need energy cells to travel through the broken down ship, and these can be found all throughout the game. In fact, out of the 9 available in your adventure, you only need 5 to get to the codes, and I already had 6 by the time I needed them through pretty casual exploration. Now, the one thing that's kinda dumb here is that even though you've been lifting these from all over the galaxy, for some reason the Valhalla won't let you just take an energy cell out of a device after placing it in. I get why it's there mechanically, so you can't just abuse the system and get all the extra items in the Valhalla and then get to the codes, but narratively, it makes no sense. Still, if you're worried about which doors or devices you need the cells for just to complete the game, well, I mean, you fly here on your ship, which is also a save station, so come on, just make it easier for yourself. But the correct path is also pretty obvious. Once you succeed though, you'll be able to take the fleet to planet planet phase, but as soon as you land, the pure phazon in the atmosphere completely overloads Samus, putting her into a perpetual state of hyper mode and even taking her over to the point where her ship won't let her board because as far as its scanners can tell, that's no longer Samus. So now there's no turning back. It's Saturday night, you've got a date with Dark Samus, several liters of evil space goop, and a Doom Eternal mixtape.
Let's rock.
Yeah, given that you're just stuck in hyper mode, everything in this place falls at your feet. They give you plenty of room here just to run through and feel like an unstoppable force, and when you finally make it to the core of the planet, none other than Dark Samus is there waiting for you. She sort of has more than one form, opting to possess the stolen and corrupted Aurora unit stationed there, and when you take her out, she's down for good this time. It's also apparently enough to destroy the phazon inside Samus, effectively curing her. Just like that, I guess. Blow up the planet, escape with the Federation, and it's a job well done. The last of the phazon has been destroyed, and the galaxy is at peace. If you collect every item in the game, you also see a little teaser of Silex from Hunters tracking down Samus, but I actually think the 75% ending is a bit more interesting. Samus takes a load off at Skytown and just spends some time reflecting on the fates of the other Hunters, especially Rundus. I miss Rundus. It's a great side of her humanity, and I'm glad that they took the time to show it to us. While I do understand that the motion controls are really going to turn off some players, and it does spend too much time holding your hand and telling you where you're supposed to go, I think the game makes up for it by really leaning into its own identity. There's a moment in this game where you need to open up the way to Elysia's Leviathan Seed by dropping a giant bomb you've assembled over a certain area along with the entire section of Skytown holding it. You have to fight off space pirates along the way, try to escape in a pod, and when it fails, frantically rush to repair it so you can take off and escape to safety. Maybe all that doesn't sound very Metroid to you, but I'm kind of fine with that. There's enough of the Metroid identity here for me to recognize it as maybe not one of the strongest examples of what the series can do, but a fresh take on the formula, a thrilling action game, and a worthy conclusion to this story Retro Studios set out to tell, elevated to a galactic scale. I know people have their complaints about the deviations it takes from the series staples, but it's so good at what it accomplishes that I can really appreciate this game as something special. I wouldn't want every Metroid game to be set up like this, I probably don't even want Prime 4 to be like Corruption, but I'm glad I got to play it, and I know I'll be returning to it for an absolute blast of a game several times over. If you're willing to try out a Metroid game of a different flavor, I absolutely recommend Metroid Prime 3 Corruption. It has been an incredible Metroid month, but we're down to just one game left to look at this year, and it's a title that a lot of us thought would never actually arrive. So I hope to see you there next week on Halloween as we finally, after all of these years, take a look at Metroid Dread. But until then, remember that my top tier patrons get to see these videos 2 days early. You can find me on Twitter, Twitch, Discord, Sunset City, whichever you prefer, links in the description, and of course, as always, spread the word, tell your friends, and until we see each other again, thank you so much for watching. See you next mission.
Hello.
Last year, at the end of my Metroid Fusion review, I mentioned a game that had been in development for years, like it was some kind of ghost project that only existed in rumors and speculation, so imagine my surprise when the following June, we got some news about the Metroid series that no one was expecting. I guess the delay on Metroid Prime 4 wasn't too surprising. The development of that one's been a little rough so far, but that was the case for the original Prime 2, and we can tackle this new entry whenever it's actually been released. But that's okay, because they still had something to get Metroid fans hyped up that day. I don't think I can accurately describe exactly how I felt when Dread was announced, but I can show you. Oh, I will explain it all to you later. What's it? Yeah! Yes! Oh my god! So many years waiting for this! This was an enormous deal to Metroid fans. We had some remakes and fan games and such, but not since Fusion had we seen a brand new 2D Metroid title, and that game came out almost 20 years ago. So hearing that a team who delivered a pretty dang solid remake of Metroid 2 was taking over to give us a game that had existed in passing interviews and forum posts for the last 2 decades was nothing short of a dream come true. And now it's here. I actually have Metroid Dread in my hands, but before we talk about it, I should clarify a couple of things. First of all, this is a follow-up to Mercury Steam's previous work in the Metroid series, that being Samus Returns, and it builds off of some mechanics and everything from that, but I was already planning on covering remakes and spin-offs in 2022's Metroid Month when I started this whole mess last year. I just never could have fathomed that this game would have existed at all, let alone released before I could have tackled Samus Returns, so I do have to do things a little out of order here. But secondly, this is a spoiler-heavy review. I was originally going to try to split things up between sections, you know, story, gameplay, everything like that. But if you want to go into this game blind, I recommend going into it completely blind. That covers everything between narrative to gameplay. So this is just if you want to hear my thoughts on the game as it stands right now. For everyone still here, spoilers ahead, this is Metroid Dread. So like I said before, this was developer Mercury Steam's second project in the Metroid series after their work on Samus Returns, a retelling of the bounty hunter's adventures on planet SR-388 to eradicate the Metroid species. To give my quick thoughts on that now, I actually really enjoy this game. It's not my favorite in the series, but it's a good showcase of where the series could continue to go, and it was just so great to see Nintendo finally spark some life back into this franchise. It seemed like Sakamoto was really pleased with their work as well. He decided he could entrust this team with the project that he kept on the back burner for years. Originally planned to be a game on the Nintendo DS running off a really similar engine to Fusion, Dread was finally going to move the story further a bit, but those plans never really came together, and it seemed like Sakamoto just wasn't satisfied with how the current tech he had to work with was treating the idea for his game. But now that he had his little crew chosen, it was finally time to resurrect Dread, and a lot of us had no idea that it was being teased with Samus Returns itself. By collecting every item in the game, you can unlock special images showing off the history of the Chozo race on planet SR-388, their colonization of the planet, the discovery of the dangerous Parasite X that could possess living organisms and served as the main threat of Fusion, the creation of the Metroids to combat this threat, and the loss of control as the Chozo are driven out of the planet by the evolving creatures. But if you reach 100% completion, you see the Chozo responsible for creating the Metroids meeting with some kind of general, and before you can put together what all this means, the scene takes a dark turn as we see the first example of true malicious intent from the usually peaceful Chozo. Why would this guy kill them? What are his goals? And who is this mysterious Chozo general? These are the questions that help lay the groundwork for the events of Dread, where we see that a signal from a distant world known as Planet ZDR reaches the Galactic Federation, showing signs that somehow the Parasite X seems to be alive and well. The Federation decides to send out a group of DNA-extracting robots called Emmy, made of the most resilient material in the galaxy, to survey the planet and see if the parasite can be located. I guess they got tired of sending squishy human researchers and troopers to get murked on these planets, but it still doesn't fare much better for the Emmy, who failed to report in. So it looks like it's up to Samus yet again, who receives a bounty to go check out Planet ZDR, locate the Emmy, and figure out why they're sleeping on the job, and if any traces of the X-Parasite can be located, eliminate them. Things don't exactly go according to plan. Almost as soon as Samus lands on ZDR, she takes an elevator down deep into the planet's interior, where she encounters a figure at an ancient Chozo temple, and if you were paying attention to our little history lesson from earlier, this guy's gonna look familiar. Well, Samus sure doesn't know him, and she's quick to jump into the offense, but this dude is clearly not toying around with her and gets the upper hand pretty easily. I mean, she lands a pretty solid hit on the guy, but he gets her by the throat and seems just about ready to kill her on the spot until something happens to her. She's been stripped of her powers once more, trapped in the deep underbelly of an unfamiliar world and facing some kind of powerful enemy whose intentions are unclear at best. This leaves the legendary bounty hunter with two objectives: survive and escape. I feel like a lot of players probably stuck around this first screen a bit just to get a feel of the controls, and oh man, are these slick. The movement here is fast, fluid, and while Samus feels like she's got a good amount of weight to her, she feels entirely in your control. When you can impress me with just how good running and jumping is, you're doing something right, but they sweeten the deal a bit more with one of my favorite new inclusions to Samus's moveset, that being the slide. You don't have your morph ball from the get-go, but you can use this slide to slip through small passages easily without losing any momentum. It helps communicate just how fast-paced this game is, and the progression is dedicated to keeping things feeling fluid and almost effortless when it comes to platforming. Wall jumping is as easy as leaping toward a surface and bouncing off it to rocket in the other direction, and mid-air control is absolutely perfect. This might be the best set of controls for Samus we've had so far. Now, during the times when she has to slow down a bit and take out some enemies, we also have two mechanics brought over from Samus Returns: 360 aiming and the parry. With the use of the left analog stick, Samus can aim in any direction of the player's choosing with ease, and holding down the left bumper will have Samus locked into place to make it easier to aim at a specific angle. It can feel a little strange at first for new players, but after a few uses, this aiming technique can be used to land precise hits with ease. Now, the parry move is one idea that needed the most work from the last time, and thankfully it seems to have gotten it. The idea is that when an enemy is about to attack you, a yellow flash will appear over them, and by hitting the X button at that precise moment, you can counter their attack and return the favor with a powerful blast. This can be the quickest way to take down certain opponents, using their own attacks against them to create an opening and take advantage of their vulnerability. Now, in Samus Returns, this could really just mean waiting. You'd have to sit around until an enemy charges at you, because your normal attacks could be next to useless against even the weakest of enemies, and it made the game feel like it just relied way too heavily on that one move. In Dread though, this is just one way to take out your enemies. Missiles are very effective weapons and can take out smaller enemies with ease, and your arm cannon still feels very useful here. Its rate of fire is also insane. Like, the only limit on how fast this thing can dish out punishment is how fast you can spam the fire button. That said, you can also use melee to get a preemptive strike on enemies that might coax them into launching a counterable attack or just take away a chunk of their health. Either way, you're not slowing down here like you were in Samus Returns. Dread wants to keep you powerful and keep you moving. There are limits to your abilities though, and the game will be sure to remind you of that. As you travel around planet ZDR, you can check in with the Atom AI who's still locked into your ship and relays information to you like he did in Fusion. But he's not controlling the network of this environment like he was on the BSL station. He can kind of give you hints, but he can't tell you exactly where you're supposed to go. One threat he does his best to walk you through is one of the things that brought you here to begin with, and that would be the Emmy. Turns out, these things have gone rogue, and they seem very intent on hunting down Samus and extracting something from her. They only exist in certain zones of the game, but these encounters can be rather intense, and I think this whole concept is what really helps sell the game. Anytime you enter an Emmy zone, you're no longer the hunter. You are absolutely outmatched by these things that are capable of traveling all over the walls and ceiling, travel through ventilation shafts, and they can sense your movements based off the sounds you make while you walk around, and if they catch you, you have a very small window where you can counter them and get away for a few moments, but if you fail, it's a game over. These zones are often placed in the center of the areas that you're going to explore, so you'll be dodging in and out of them as you try to maneuver around planet ZDR, and it adds one more element that rewards you for collecting abilities and upgrades, as these will give you new ways to avoid or hide from these enemies. This is a Metroid game after all, and you'll be picking up stuff throughout the entire game. There's the usual suspects, your charge beam, varying gravity suits, space jump, screw attack, missile upgrades, as well as expansions to your health and missile ammo. The latter two are split up a little as well, as you'll find most missile expansions that will increase your capacity by 2, but also some that bump it up by 10. And you'll also see plenty of energy tanks, but also energy pieces, sets of 4 smaller tanks that when completed will form a new energy tank, kind of tapping into their inner Zelda a bit there. Now what's kind of surprising to me is that they keep the morph ball from you for a pretty long time. It's usually one of the first things you get in a Metroid game, but here you might be going an hour and a half in your first playthrough without it. I like this because, well, I missed it. It helps you realize just how useful that ability really is, as you'll be seeing plenty of areas where you know you need it but you just don't have it yet, but it also helps you appreciate the slide. As you're more conscious of the capabilities of the morph ball, you also notice what a fluid and quick alternative the slide is for traveling around under obstacles. As you gain a solid understanding of each ability's pros and cons, you appreciate both, and one never becomes an outright replacement for the other. What's cool is how you eventually get the ball too, as the game does toy around with the fusion principle here, with many boss encounters utilizing abilities you have to overcome and earn for yourself, and it doesn't hurt that these fights can be really, really good. I think Corbius is going to go down as one of the most memorable early bosses in the series. I already love this guy because there's so many ways to approach this fight. He's got a few phases, constantly switching things up to catch you off guard, but as you take advantage of not only your own arsenal but also your surroundings, you'll be able to overcome him with wit and skill. This goes for most fights in the game too. These dudes can be really threatening and you have to stay on your toes because Metroid Dread is out to give you a challenge, alright? This game is giving you the most versatile and agile Samus in the series, and it expects you to take advantage of that. An element that makes its way here from Samus Returns is these little interactive cutscenes that play out during fights, and I love the way they're implemented here. There's times where you'll need to pay close attention to your enemies so you can parry a very specific move, and when you do, a scene plays out where Samus goes in for these ridiculous theatrics, really getting hands-on with her opponent so you can mash the attack buttons to either lay into them with missiles or your beam weapon the entire time to deal some additional damage. These cinematic moments in the battles are a sight to behold, by far one of my favorite inclusions to boss combat, but it helps that these moments have to be earned through the player's awareness and reflexes. I do have one gripe with boss encounters though, and that would be their sort of repetitive nature in the second half of the game. I guess these guys are more like mini-bosses. They're certainly not as dramatic or long as bigger encounters, but I fought several variations of these guys, and each time they showed up, it was just like, okay, I guess we're doing this again. Oh, you've got exactly one new move the last guy didn't? That's cool. but you're still dead. And then these guys. Well, I don't know what it is, but I had a really tough time getting a hang of them. Okay, actually, I know exactly what it is. It's their stupid red charging attack that has an outlandish hitbox and a very small window to dodge. You're supposed to use one of the new abilities called the flash shift, which lets you dart around left to right and helps you avoid damage, but man, your window of opportunity can be really small. The areas you have to fight them in can be really cramped, and sometimes it just felt like it didn't really want to work. And then there's a room where you have to fight 2 of them at once. Look, I'm all for a good challenge, but I hate this room. It takes a step over the line where it goes from difficult to just stupid. These aren't the only big bads you'll be collecting goodies from though, as there will come a time in each Emmy zone where you've traveled through the right corridors and have enough items to open up a room where these central units controlling parts of the planet and obviously primitive mother brain style AIs are residing. You can take these guys out with little to no effort and absorb their energy to gain access to a temporary buff known as the Omega Cannon, the only weapon capable of taking down the resilient Emmy. Even then, it's not an instant win or anything. You have to open up enough room between you and the killer robot to first whittle down their protective layer and then blast away their core, but it's still nothing too complicated. If you have the slightest concept of spatial awareness, you'll be okay. By defeating these tension-riddled tin cans, you'll obtain a specific trait from them to help flesh out your moveset. This is actually how you obtain the Morph Ball in the early game. Now, like I said before, you'll recognize the grand majority of abilities you can obtain from bosses, Emmy encounters, or the returning Chozo statues. Your beam and missiles will see various upgrades, making them more powerful and widening the range of what they can affect, but you'll also see stuff like the grapple beam and speed booster come back. I'm really glad the speed booster makes a return here. By jumping and sliding and just learning how to move around the terrain, you can rocket through these areas like never before, nearly putting Sonic himself to shame. Of course, this comes with the returning Shine Spark as well, and this might be the most use I've ever seen it get in one game. It's incredibly satisfying to pull off, but the game also hides some upgrades in places where you can only grab them with the use of a Shine Spark, and sometimes other abilities stacked on top of that, and it can be really demanding on your hands to pull some of this off. I love this. The challenge is fun, and nothing matches the feeling of mastering these tricks, but I can also see how this could be incredibly alienating to some players. Like, there's tough, and then there's demanding perfection. This isn't going to be a win for everyone. Now, that's only going to be a problem if you're really going out of your way for that 100% completion status, so it stands to reason that not every casual player is really going to have to even put up with these sections, but there's still plenty for the average gamer to find as well. Stuff like power bombs are just as helpful as ever at revealing hidden objects and passageways, and the incredible force coming out of these things is just... it's so good. The grapple beam sees some really good use here too. Using it for navigation is great. It works just like it did in Super, but it's also given a good amount of combat utility, letting you pull parts of enemies away from them, take away their defenses, stuff like that, but they also find new ways to let you use it to manipulate the environment. I especially like that you can use it to quickly grab onto magnetic surfaces. If this ability never made you feel like Spider-Man before, this will definitely do the trick. Speaking of those magnetic surfaces though, those are tied into one of the new abilities in the game, the Spider Magnet, which allows Samus to grab hold of surfaces coated with this magnetic blue substance but climb along them as well. You can use the Spider Magnet to wall jump up surfaces like this too if you want to get a move on, but you can also grab onto some moving platforms to get through areas quickly too. This ability sees more use than others, like the Phantom Cloak. This will let you turn invisible for a short period of time until your Aeon meter is depleted, at which point it'll start draining your health instead. As you can imagine, this is utilized most frequently during the Emmy encounters. If one of them is close to you, you may be able to find a place to hide and use the cloak to shake them, but beyond that, it's really only good for bypassing very specific doors. I doubt you'll be using it otherwise. The Storm Missile shares a bit of that same problem. This ability lets you lock onto multiple targets and barrage them all with missiles. It's great for opening up specific areas, but it's kind of a slow process to get it to lock onto more than one thing or the same target multiple times, and while I'm sure some people have found ways to make this really effective during combat, to me it just feels cumbersome, and I forget about it as soon as I'm done using it to clear an obstacle in the environment. It's better than the spin boost, which is just a glorified double jump you get later on in the game. Like, it's fine I guess, but it's replaced so quickly with the space jump that it feels really pointless. Like, why is this even here? The cross bombs are a neat idea though. You can use them to lay down a series of bombs in a cross pattern that clear out certain sections of blocks faster and even be used to cross tight gaps when in Morph Ball mode. The final new inclusion would be the Pulse Radar, another Samus Returns invention that you don't get until later on in the game this go around, but I think this is probably where it's best utilized anyway. Basically, you can use your Aeon meter to send out a pulse that reveals destructible blocks in the area, which is super helpful at this point point in the game, because while the map will give you hints that items are hidden in certain locations, this can be used as a way to track them down if you really just can't find them on your own. That said, you'll probably be incentivized to explore these areas from top to bottom already, because man, these environments are remarkable. From the initial trailer, I was a little worried that too much of the game would look like this desolate lab, but I was really worried for nothing. Planet ZDR is gorgeous. The sense of atmosphere and life in this place is incredible. It's one of the only Metroid games I can think of where the background just has these non-violent wildlife that you can interact with just to make the place feel a little more real. And then there's the little details, like the film grain that covers the Emmy zones, and it really helps sell that feeling of, well, dread that should be dripping from these locations, and the use of color. Oh, the color is outstanding. Definitely glad I got to play this on the Switch OLED, where these visuals can really pop. It would be hard to accurately describe what a difference this little screen makes on its own, but trust me when I say that Dread looks better on this handheld than it does on my TV. But this is also a game with a mission to pick up the story where Fusion left off, so is the plot of Dread able to keep up with the tight and impressive gameplay?
The Metroid series to me is something I think successfully places the player in Samus's boots. You learn things as she does, you get stronger as she gets stronger, and I feel it really creates a bond between the player and character that only a few other Nintendo franchises manage to pull off well. It's what makes the Tresodia sequence in Metroid Zero Mission so effective. It's what makes everything about experiencing Metroid Fusion so terrifying. Metroid is a very isolated experience, the only thing saving your butt being your own skill and determination. And since I so happen to enjoy these games in isolation very much in the spirit of the franchise, it makes completing them that more rewarding to me. The thrill of getting new upgrades and immediately putting them to use, watching Samus perform a coup d'etat thanks to your help, and when all said and done, replaying it again for a faster time to get a new record and maybe getting a new end screen. That's my Metroid experience, one I look forward to every single time and have been for nearly 30 years of my life.
As beautiful as this place is, it only becomes more dangerous the further into it Samus explores. In time, she encounters the only friendly face left on the planet, a Chozo named Quiet Robe, who lays out everything that's been going on. The general who attacked Samus at the beginning of the game is the leader of the Mockin tribe, Ravenbeak. See, Ravenbeak is obsessed with power, basically worshipping the idea itself, and when Quiet Robe and the rest of the Thoha tribe tried to destroy planet SR-388 after fleeing the Metroids that had grown too strong for them, Ravenbeak had them all executed so he could preserve the creatures he saw as the perfect warriors he could one day use to lead the galaxy to his own idea of peace and order. Quiet Robe was the only one left alive, kept for his knowledge of the Metroids and the Thoha tribe's ability to control them. Yeah, so apparently the Thoha can control the Metroids, the same creatures they seem to lose control over on SR-388. So can the Thoha control the Metroids or not? Does the control weaken as the creatures evolve? Were there too many of them? Like, look dude, I love Quiet Robe and the game has a pretty great story overall, but I'm still kind of stuck on this one potential plot hole. Anyway, Ravenbeak's whole galactic conquest plan kinda got put to the back burner after one of his soldiers was infected with an X-parasite and managed to infiltrate the base here on ZDR. After struggling to fight off the quickly spreading invasion of the X, the parasites were trapped in a facility on the planet, and now with the Metroid species dead, Ravenbeak used the footage of the X to lure Samus and the Emmy here with the intention of using the robots to extract the Metroid DNA from her cells and create his army. Quiet Robe opens the way to Ravenbeak, deactivates the remaining Emmy, and requests Samus to aid him in stopping the crazed tyrant. This is a pretty big bout of exposition. The game just plops right in the middle of the game, and I know I should feel more critical about it, but I mean, you can skip cutscenes if you really don't care about all this, and for somebody that's been following the Metroid series for so long, this scene is everything to me. This is the first time we get to see a Chozo out and about chatting with us in-game like this, and names like Quiet Robe and Ravenbeak, that's something that perfectly fits how the manga depicted this culture, and getting to hear all of this being spoken in the Chozo language is such an enormous treat, but they cap it off with the perfect addition. This is the only speaking line Samus has in the entire game, and it's perfect. She is so cool, and you can hear the confidence in every word she says. She's a Chozo warrior, and she'll get the job done. That's the Samus Aran I know. Sadly, after their discussion, Quiet Robe is assassinated by a Chozo drone, and after the machine is destroyed, Samus is just left to gaze at another one of her family members taken away from her. If this struggle wasn't personal before, it sure is now. Samus makes her way to the open facility, and just like 2 rooms in, she encounters an X-parasite. Look, Quiet Robe said they were contained, not dead. But yeah, by entering this place, we kinda, sort of, maybe accidentally let the X out, which is bad. really bad. In fact, it's so bad that it shifts the course of the entire game. From now on, every single biological creature we encounter has a little wiggly goo monster living inside it, and man, I love this. It's such a big revelation as we see all these things floating out of the base and quickly take over the entire planet, even taking over the corpse of Quiet Robe, who reactivates the Emmy to hunt us down again. Yeah, I think we all know what needs to happen to this place. This really is awesome though. Seeing all these sci-fi body horror ideas brought from Fusion over to the modern system 20 years later, it feels like they absolutely nailed the tone the X were created for. These things are creepy and kind of disgusting. I like to think this gross sludge we see in the first X room is just a result of the parasite possessing the same host for so long that it's completely decomposed this whole thing and its cells are just mush now. And then there's moments where you get those little revelations of, hey, remember that weird experiment twitching around in that one laboratory? Well, if the X are flying around this place looking for new hosts, uh-oh. The second half of this game is so cool, and I know people were worried that Nintendo was showing off way too much in trailers and stuff, but no, this got me completely by surprise. And it kept a big ol' smile on my face as I kept exploring, fought bosses, collected power-ups, discovered the latent ability to observe the life force from the creatures that I touch, grabbed missile expansions, and wait, what was that last part? So, this is another cool twist. In the final areas of the game, I started noticing how Adam slowly acted stranger and stranger when talking to Samus, and I started to get suspicious. But watching Ravenbeak keeping tabs on Samus as she starts developing these new energy-absorbing abilities, I put together exactly what was going on here. Turns out, the last time we spoke with Adam at all was on the elevator ride down here. The entire rest of the time, it was Ravenbeak, leading us along so Samus would either have her Metroid DNA inside her extracted by one of the Emmy, or have her fully transform into a form of Metroid herself, whichever came first. While the Metroids are biologically coded to obey those in the Thoha tribe, which might have explained why the baby back in Metroid 2 got so attached to Samus now that I think about it, they are also designed to register the Mach-In as enemies, and while the Thoha DNA in Samus's body was helping keep the Metroid DNA at bay, it's revealed she also possesses Mach-In genes as well. And not just anyone's, but Ravenbeak's, who oversaw the process of infusing his own DNA into Samus herself. Is this woman okay? Because her DNA is a clustered smorgasbord at this point, and it's a miracle she even vaguely resembles a human being. With Samus now, for all intents and purposes, succumbing to her Metroid genes, Ravenbeak offers her a place at his side as the ultimate living weapon, but she's obviously not having any of that, and this initiates one of the best final bosses in the whole series. I gotta add, I just love how confident this game is that it just let this be the conclusion. I mean, in terms of legacy bosses, we got Kraid, but nothing else. It would have been really easy to find a way to shoehorn Ridley back into all of this, and I love Ridley, I really do, but the guy's gotta die eventually. He does not belong in this game, and I'm glad he isn't here. But this fight between Ravenbeak and Samus, this feels important. It feels earned, and man, it is destroying my thumbs. You have to use just about everything at your disposal during this fight. Even the slide makes its way in here, and these dorks are just spending every second they get just showing off how absurdly over the top they can be. It's an incredible test of your reflexes and skills, and it's one of those bosses that rewards you for learning the patterns. Where a first-time player might get really stuck on the first phase of this fight, but if you fought him a couple of times yourself, you can just step up and clean house like it's nothing. But just as Samus is ready to deal the finishing blow, Ravenbeak gets the upper hand once again and has her life in his grip, claiming that he doesn't even need to keep her alive anymore, as he can just clone her to create the perfect army of the galaxy's most dangerous bounty hunter, and that right there is the final straw. You know how I said that Samus's talk with Quiet Robe was the only time she speaks in the game? I mean, that is true, but it's not the last time we hear her voice. Samus lets the Metroid Inner take over completely, even transforming her entire suit into this new design to resemble what she's become, and drains the energy not only from Ravenbeak, but even the entire ship they've been fighting on. In the wreckage of the vessel, Ravenbeak is taken over by an X-parasite, transforming him into this grotesque amalgamation of everything that X had absorbed, but a good blasting from the Hyper Beam is enough to take it down. We get our escape sequence for the game as Samus sprints from the exploding planet, but just as she's trying to escape, Adam warns her not to touch the controls of the ship as she'll just drain drain the energy from it, but help comes from an unexpected source as the X-infested Quiet Robe appears from behind her, somehow maintaining his own consciousness long enough to offer himself over to her, using his Thoha genes to help her gain total control over her Metroid form as she flies away to safety while planet ZDR explodes. The ending of this game is intense, exciting, and has implications for our leading lady that will undoubtedly follow her through any future adventures. That might not be so impressive for an isolated incident as just the conclusion to the story, but it's something that's true for the entire adventure as a whole. Metroid Dread wants you to feel helpless, but it also wants you to enjoy the thrill of overcoming those odds and going from the bottom of the food chain on planet ZDR to its apex predator. Not just in the boss fights, not just in your encounters with the Emmy, the planet itself bends to your will as you become more powerful and knowledgeable of its layout. Every ability and item you recover is one step closer to you becoming the master of this location as you seamlessly travel around the planet. It wraps you around through familiar locations and sometimes gates off which way you can progress, but rewards you for breaking its own rules, even to the point where some boss encounters have secret means of defeat by obtaining items you shouldn't even have yet. Metroid Dread nails it. I love this game. Is it better than Super Metroid? Is it the best game in the series? Probably too soon to say, but either way, I don't care. It's everything that I wanted it to be and more. It's a thrilling action adventure that builds off a story that hasn't progressed in nearly 20 years and opens up the door to a bright future people once thought was dying off. Mercury Steam, bravo. I admire the work that went into this title, and I love it with every bit of my heart. Now please, credit everyone who worked on it, not just the people who were there for a certain period of time. Standard practice in the industry is not an excuse. Do what you did with the Metroid formula and become the trendsetters. And to each and every one of you watching, I guess all I can say is please, please buy Metroid Dread. This has been one of the most exciting months of my entire life. Getting to do so much with so many people, being able to share my love for this franchise with all of you, and nothing made it more special than being able to cap it off with a game like this. You know, Metroid Dread is not just a testament to the growth of the franchise or to Samus Aran's journey, it's a testament to you, to us, to the community, to everyone who stuck by this franchise's side, who held it up, who kept it going, who supported it no matter what. It's why I wanted to put such an emphasis on the community for this Metroid Month. This game, this month, this marathon, this franchise would not still exist without us. So to each and every one of you, thank you. And of course,
see you next mission.
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 This is Wayneisboss signing off. I want to offer my gratitude to everyone who helped contribute to these videos and to thank all of you for helping celebrate this year's Metroid Month. See you next mission. And there you have it. Can you tell that I like Metroid? Well, I'm certainly ready to not talk about Metroid again for a while, at least until October, and I don't know when the next time is that I'm going to be working on a project of quite this size. Even now, just putting this together as a compilation, looking back on this in retrospect, it is hard for me to describe how much this project in particular meant to me, and what a huge step it was for me to be able to get together with so many other talented people to put together a huge event, a celebration for a franchise like this. And it just was great that it lined up perfectly with the release of a new Metroid title. I never could have predicted that would just happen like that. So it really was just a lightning in a bottle situation. A lot of it was just a dream come true. I couldn't even put the Did You Know Gaming video into this. It's not my video, it's not from my channel, so it wouldn't have felt right to throw that in here. But I will at least leave a link in the appropriate timestamp leading to that video if you are interested in it. And of course, I would not get to do any of this if it wasn't for your help, viewers like you, and of course my Patreon supporters. And of course, I need to give a very special shout out to my current top tier patrons. This month they are Brendan Hess, Christine Larkin, Earl Valco, Jeremiah Harrison, Jonathan, Letterick, McKenzel, Mr. SP, Wonton Photo, Nicholas Morgan, Patricia Marcoux, and Surus the Skeptic. You guys are the reason I'm able to do all of this, the reason that I keep working on videos, the reason I'm excited to continue to do so. Thank you so much. You make it possible and you make it worth it. I say that every video, and I absolutely mean it every single time. Thank you. And of course, with all of that said, I need to get back to work because I have plenty more that I'm really stoked to get out for you guys. So yeah, I'll see you next mission.